Good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Paul Cooper, the Chairman of Strategic Planning and Infrastructure. I'm pleased to welcome you to the meeting of this committee this evening. The meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Council's YouTube channel. Will anyone else be recording the proceedings? I only ask so that people in the meeting are aware. Councillor Mackay. Councillor Mackay has reserved his right. Councillor Mrs. Grigg. Councillor Mackay, can you turn your microphone off? Thank you.
I reserve my right.
Again, Councillor Mrs. Grigg has reserved her right. Thank you very much. For those members in the chamber, please ensure that your microphones are switched off once you've finished talking, as this will disallow other people from speaking if you do that, and it will also affect the quality of the Skype call for broadcast and may pick up what you're saying. Just a little matter of housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire drill this evening, but if the fire alarm were to sound during the meeting, please remain seated and await further instruction from Olivia, the clerk. Move on to item number 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. Apologies have been received this evening from Councillors Springett and Councillors Clark. Item number 2 are substitute members. Councillor Simon Webb is present as substitute for Councillor Springett, and Councillor English is present for Councillor Clark.
I believe Councillor Clark is in fact intending to arrive and is just walked through the door, so I won't be substituting for him.
Thank you very much for that correction. Therefore, apologies have not been received now from Councillor Clark, who has joined the meeting and will not be substituted by Councillor English. Thank you very much. Item number 3 is urgent items. I intend to take 3 urgent items to item 14, Maidstone Plan Review, Regulation 19 Consultation, Evidence Documents and Suitability Appraisal, as these updates contain information that contributes to the items which are under consideration this evening. These urgent updates are, firstly, an updated Map 2 in the Appendix 2 Policies Map. The updated version was uploaded onto the website, circulated to members on Monday the 28th of September, and has been included in the printed agenda papers. The second update is 2, the Maidstone Transport Model Option 2 Test Results Background Documents. This was made publicly available on Friday 1st of October, with all members informed by email. And the third update is a series of amendments to agenda item 14, as outlined in the update, which was labelled Urgent Update Number 2. This was circulated earlier today, and there is a copy on your desks. As this update was circulated today, can I please ask all members of the committee to confirm that they have read this update? Is that confirmed? Thank you very much. Item number 4 is notification of visiting members. I have received notification that the following members wish to speak on item 11, and that is Councillor Tom Sams and Councillor Janetta Sams. I also have been informed that the following members wish to speak on item 14 only. That is Councillor Hinder, Councillor Harwood, Councillor Richard Webb, Councillor English, Councillor Hasty, Councillor Perry, Councillor Round, and Councillor Janetta Sams. Are we aware of any other members who are to speak? If you could come forward to the microphone and indicate which agenda item you wish to speak on.
Councillor Brindle for item 14.
Thank you very much. That is noted. Visiting members will be invited to speak in the order in which they registered their attendance for the meeting. I apologise, Councillor Bryant. Thank you very much. Councillor Bryant has reserved her right to speak on item number 14. I do apologise, and one more.
Councillor Nagy, and I will be observing tonight. I will not be speaking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nagy. Item number 5, I believe that is everyone. Item number 5 is disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members and officers? Councillor Garton.
Mr. Chairman, it is alleged that I may have previously indicated a predisposition towards a particular garden community proposal, because I said in a spell of frustration rather, it goes for Litzing as well as Lenham who wants to live next to a motorway, it'll be hard to find a less attractive place to concrete over. Having said that, I'm completely open to being persuaded and will listen to the debate and presentations tonight with an open mind. If I had my way, my very personal desire would be to breed squirrels, crows, rabbits and bees. However, I don't want to build any houses at all. However, I've been elected by humans to represent humans. Of the latter kind, there will be 10 billion of them soon, and they need to live somewhere. For many reasons, Southeast England is a desirable place for humans to dwell. As human society, we need houses. We need to home the current generation and provide an affordable place for the future generation.
Councillor Garton, is this part of the disclosure?
It is indeed. It is the reason why I said these things.
Okay, thank you.
A lack of housing supply will do nothing but push housing costs at even higher and unaffordable levels. As locally elected councillors, we have in law no choice to agree or disagree.
Councillor Garton, I think we have got the essence of your disclosure. I think if we can leave it there. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Okay.
Councillor Mrs. Russell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm keeping an open mind. I've read the documents and considered the urgent updates. I therefore look forward to the debate later this evening, and I will be voting with an open mind later this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Russell. And Councillor Mumford.
I've taken part in many meetings, including public meetings regarding the local plan review building up to this meeting. I, however, am not predetermined on anything. I will be keeping an open mind, listening to the debate. I intend to speak and vote.
Thank you very much. Are there any other disclosures from members or officers this evening? Thank you. Item number six is disclosures of lobbying. I am aware that there has been very significant lobbying for this evening, and therefore I will ask the clerk to in turn go around the committee and ask for disclosures of lobbying.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Clark.
All matters relating to the local plan.
Thank you, Chairman. Have you been lobbied?
I've been lobbied extensively on multiple sites which are included in the local plan review, which has been discussed on item 14 of the agenda.
Councillor Garton.
Extensively.
Councillor Mrs. Grigg.
All items relating to the local plan.
Councillor Mackay.
All items related to the local plan.
Councillor Mumford.
All items relating to the local plan, item 14.
Councillor Russell.
All items related to item 14, the local plan review.
Councillor Spooner.
Item 14.
Councillor Webb.
Item 14, I've had 298 objections to the Lidsing proposal, of which 296 were against it, one was for it, and one was an abusive email.
Thank you very much, members. Item number 7 is to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I believe it is very important to remain in open session this evening, and therefore to facilitate this, I move that all items be taken in public as proposed, except the exempt Appendix 4 working draft statements of common ground with neighbouring authorities and other prescribed bodies. However, there are suitable Part 1 summaries of each of these statements of common ground within the local plan review report, which can be discussed during open session. I believe that we can reference those sufficiently without the need to enter into closed session, but would request that members are careful in referring to any of the detail on the yellow pages. The statements of common ground will be reported back to this committee or the chairman and vice chairman in accordance with the protocol agreed by the committee in January 2021. Is this agreed? Is there any disagreement there? I take that as agreed. Thank you very much. Item number 8 are minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of September 2021. which was circulated separately. The minutes of the meeting held on 21st September were published on the 29th of September. Does anyone have any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? Therefore, I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of September 2021 be agreed as a correct record, and I will sign them at the close of this meeting. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Item number 9 is presentation of petitions. There are no petitions this evening. Item number 10 is question and answer session for members of the public. There are 2 questions from members of the public to the chairman this evening. I now call upon Ms. Kate Hammond to ask her question.
Thank you, Chairman. Please confirm the number of hectares of Greenfield land which make up the total proposed residential site allocation in the draft local plan.
Thank you very much. The exact amount of Greenfield land that makes up the proposed residential site allocations is difficult to calculate, as there are a number of sites that are both Greenfield and Brownfield in nature. However, our estimate is that there are approximately 14 sites which are predominantly Greenfield in nature, the garden settlements of Leeds, Heathlands, and 12 sites combined for 94.3 hectares together. This totals 543.3 hectares, including obviously Heathlands and Leeds. Do you have a follow-up question arising from my answer?
Yes, please. Last Wednesday, Councillor David Burton claimed that climate change is at the core of every decision and action the Council takes. So was climate change policy at the core of the decision to build on 543 hectares of Greenfield land? Does the Council feel that removing 543 hectares of Greenfield land is consistent with climate change policy?
Ms. Hammond, I'm not entirely sure that that does arrive from my answer, but nevertheless, yes, the Council is confident of that. And the reason I say that, the scale alone of the development allows us to implement some of the mitigations for climate change that otherwise would not occur in smaller settlements. Thank you very much. Next, to speak, I call upon Steve Healy to ask his question.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is, what role has the Suitability Appraisal played in informing your draft local plan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Healy. Mason's Local Plan Review Sustainability Appraisal has been applied as an iterative process during the key stages of production of the Local Plan Review itself. It has helped to make sure the proposals in the plan are appropriate, having regard to the relevant environmental, economic and social objectives. Apologies. Do you have a supplementary question arising from my answer?
Yes, I do, Chairman. My supplementary is the Local Plan Review Sustainability Appraisal states in paragraph 4.47, the garden settlement option that performed most strongly in sustainable terms was Lidsing, followed by North Marden. Heathlands performed least well across the range of sustainability objectives. Why is Marden Garden Settlement not included in your draft local plan and Heathlands is?
Thank you very much. The Council, as local planning authority, has complied with requirements and indeed used independent sustainability appraisal to help inform its proposals. In doing so, it's taken into account the recommendations of the sustainability appraisal as proposals have been developed, and it has modified those proposals where necessary. And it is on the basis of using those proposals that site allocations have developed, as the plans in themselves have developed, which have helped form the spatial policy. Thank you very much for your question, and that concludes the question and answer session from members of the public. Item number 11 next, which is questions from members to the chairman. There are 2 questions from members to the chairman this evening. I now call upon Councillor Tom Sams to ask his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Garden Communities, Heathlands Policy SP4A and Lidsing Policy SP4B within the documents being discussed this evening. When are you planning to make the public the initial evidence from the Barton-Wilmore report commission that stated that their selection was not made on the basis of them being the sustainable options and not as residents feel selection as they are the furthest corners of the borough, therefore politically acceptable?
Thank you, Councillor Sams. This question is not associated with the Council's role as the local planning authority and therefore is not associated with the function of this committee. At no point was the Barton-Wilmore report relevant to or required by the local planning authority. The local planning authority's only concern in this regard has been assessing sites, and that has been submitted as part of the local plan review call for sites process. Councillor Sams, do you have a supplementary question arising out of the original question or reply?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've listened to your response with interest, and people can draw their own conclusions. So, no, I do not have a supplementary at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I now call upon Councillor Janetta Sams to ask her question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This council has sought advice from leaders in the field with regard to garden communities over the past 3 years. It has paid for consultants to produce reports to establish its own garden community scheme in Heathlands. And now we have learnt that an SPI workshop last week is paying for another expert, Ben Aspinall, to oversee the garden communities are deliverable with regard to their soundness and acceptable to this council. Can you please explain why this is the case? And is the cost of employing yet another independent consultant an additional cost to the council on top of the 1.5 million for Heathlands? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sams. The local planning authority is required to undertake an all-plan viability assessment of the local plan review proposals in accordance with the government's national planning policy framework. The assessment has been undertaken by consultancy Aspinall Verdi, and Ben Aspinall is their managing director of that company. The assessment therefore forms part of the evidence base for the local plan review and is not associated with the promotion of Heathlands garden community. Councillor Sams, do you have a supplementary question arising out of the original question or the reply?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think residents can obviously draw their own conclusions from that, and again, with time constraints, no, there won't be a supplementary. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, and that concludes the question and answer session from members to the chairman. Which I move on to item number 12, which is the committee work programme. Do any of the officers of or members of the committee have any comments on the work programme? No. I move that the work programme therefore be noted. Item number 13 is reports of outside bodies. There are no reports from outside bodies this evening. Item number 14 is the Maidstone Local Plan Review, Regulation 19 Consultation, Evidence Documents and Suitability Appraisal Consultation. Prior to the report's introduction, we have a number of public speakers. Each speaker will be asked to address the committee in the order in which they registered for a period of 3 minutes. The total time limit for public speaking is 12 minutes. Mrs. Sue Harwood, if you would like to speak now, please come to the front. It's the button on the middle of the microphone, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm a founding member of the Against Leeds in Garden Development Facebook group. The group was formed in December last year to help inform local people about the outrageous plan for 2,000 homes in Leedsing. No one in the area knew about this until November-December, not even the residents of Leedsing. My parents live at Abbey Court Farm in Leedsing. Some of their land is included in this scheme. They didn't even know about it, and I have copies of emails that they sent to Councillor Martin Cox in December proving this. This whole plan has caused my parents, who are in their mid-70s, a great deal of distress. They were both born and bred in Leedsing and Bredhurst, and my dad's family has lived at the farm for 6 generations. My great-granddad and his father worked for Colonel Templar, who tested hot air balloons for the military in the late 1800s in Leedsing. Indeed, the field where the testing was carried out is still called Balloon Hole today. This history will be lost forever, as this is one of the fields that are set to be concreted over. My parents don't want the houses to be built. They just want to be left alone to see out their days in their bungalow on the family farm, which my dad has worked on for 7 days a week for the last 60 years. The last 10 months have been a complete nightmare for them. They didn't want to sign any agreement, but felt they didn't have a choice and eventually gave in. They were told that if they didn't sign, their land would be unworkable because of the decade of construction works around it, so they would lose their only source of family income. They were told that their land would be worthless, and if they didn't sign, they wouldn't be able to sell it afterwards. Also, they had the threat of compulsory purchase over their heads, which they've already experienced twice in the past, where the M2 motorway was built and then widened. My elderly parents have been subjected to bullying tactics by this developer. Although this may not be illegal, it is certainly immoral and unscrupulous. My dad's mental well-being has been so severely affected that he can't actually talk about this without breaking down in tears. My mum has no idea what it is she has signed or agreed to. I hope that you became councillors for the Borough of Maidstone because you believed you could improve and help the area and also to look after the residents. My parents weren't strong enough to stand up to this manipulative developer. Please be strong for them and do the right thing. Don't just toe the party line. Vote against destroying this area. These are real people who will suffer if you agree to this. Please also be aware that the Leeds application has been reported to the Serious Fraud Office with regards to coercion and is under investigation as case ref 15040. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Harwood. I now call on Mr. Steve Ball, if you would like to come to the front and speak now. Mr. Ball? Yeah. In that case, I'll move on. If he does present himself, he can speak after Miss Helen Baker. Miss Helen Baker, if you would like to come to the front, thank you. Again, it is the button on the middle button, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
My family home of 40 plus years is in Leedsing, a small hamlet of about 13 properties. The area of Leedsing is ALLI, and we found out about this proposal on Facebook. The planners had clearly spent some considerable time concocting their plans, yet shamefully did not speak to the few people it initially affected. Maidstone received nearly 2,000 objections, and the councillors here will have received voluminous emails. Leedsing Garden Community will operate as an urban extension to the Medway area. 6.74 states there is little connection between Lordswood and Hempstead. There is no desire locally to connect them. Medway has long maintained a strategic gap and does not wish to become an urban sprawl, which will happen under Maidstone's plan. 6.75 states a small ANOB will be required for the M2 spur. The impact of this will not be minimal. The area in question is a large flat field and it would be impossible to screen it. The very designation of ANOB should be enough to prevent this part of your proposal from proceeding, yet it seems your planners can ignore it. Neighbouring authorities, developers and residents will be watching your actions very carefully. 677 of your draft plan states Maidstone recognises many aspects of this site have at least as much of an impact on Medway as Maidstone. This proposal would be an unmitigated disaster for Medway. The main landowner is also trying to build 2 further developments along Caxton Valley, creating an additional 1,100 homes. Add this to your proposal and Medway gets an additional 3,500 homes, assuming 2 cars per household, 7,000 extra cars and potentially 12,000 extra people. Maidstone will not feel this on a daily basis, but Medway most certainly will. The development will be holistically planned. Most new developments have houses packed into spaces, generally 3 to 4 stories high, ugly in modern appearance and certainly nothing holistic to be seen. Your plan notes provision for a new primary school and employment, but these areas are in Medway. You will contribute towards a new secondary school and cycling walking routes in Caxton Valley, again, Medway. So your planners put gloss on their proposals without having any capacity to deliver. The plan states measures to prevent rat runs. 7,000 additional vehicles will join pinch points of North Dane Way, Hempstead Valley Drive, Rainham Maidstone Road, Waldersley Woods Road, The Street and Boxley. You should know how horrendously busy these roads already are. How do you propose to ease the rat run of Boxley? Unless you build a bypass around Boxley, I fail to see how this can be done. Boxley is in an AONB, but you're already setting a precedent. Several other parties own land proposed to be used in this development, and all were opposed to it. We understand they've now signed something consenting to the use of their land. Under freedom of information, it would be very interesting to see whether they were strongly advised to take independent legal advice. Being told your land will be unworkable, your farm will be worthless, and you will have no future suggests an element of coercion, but perhaps you believe this is an acceptable approach. We have received the comment, hard decisions will need to be made. This is not a hard decision. The impact of your proposal will be on Medway, which has neither the infrastructure, health facilities or amenities to support such a huge influx of people. You are instrumental in destroying their open space and are whitewashing your contravention of planning law by desecrating an ANOB. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Baker. I now call on Ms Kate Hammond, if you would like to speak now. Okay, that's absolutely fine. If you could come to the front. And the same goes for you. Middle button to switch on the microphone, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. It's quite remarkable that over 2 years on, we have managed to get to this Regulation 19 milestone tonight without any genuine public debate in this chamber on the draft local plan. This plan has ducked and dived nearly every single democratic hurdle in order to meet an unnecessarily accelerated timeline. Last autumn, this committee spent more time debating whether or not to have a Regulation 18B consultation than what the Spatial Strategy actually proposed. After the narrow victory to go out for consultation, it was disappointing that it didn't propose alternative strategies. Instead, it plumped for a politically preferred one. To be honest, it might as well have not bothered consulting at all, as it is clear that none of the thousands of responses have been listened to. It is your collective democratic duty to listen to residents. Thousands of residents from all parts of the borough objected to garden settlements as a policy approach. We see no evidence tonight that these residents have been listened to. As the SPI committee, you are bestowed with the duty to guide the borough's development and spatial strategy. You are considered to be more expert than most on these matters. However, it's questionable whether this committee is even needed when it appears to have its decisions already made for you by the ruling elite. What influence has this committee got when the main event actually appears to be happening on Wednesday night this week? It is a further embarrassment by the fact that despite the preference of this committee only last week to want statements of common ground put in the public domain, the democratic authority appears to be overridden by overpowered senior officers. The reality is that if these statements were not controversial, they would be freely published. But as you probably note, they are unlikely to be easy reading. Neighbouring authorities have objected to your draft plan. Statutory consultees have objected to your draft plan. The issue is that the draft local plan is driven by political preference, as the suitability appraisal suggests, rather than sound plan making. As I'm sure you know, planning inspectors do not like politically driven local plans. They like plans which promote sustainable development, that are deliverable, that listen to local people's needs. They also want to see plans that are compliant with other government policy, like fighting climate change and reaching net zero. The draft Maidstone local plan does not do this. It fails on nearly every single front. Collectively, you all have a responsibility tonight to decide whether the draft local plan in the state can be found sound. I would respectfully propose to you that it is not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all public speakers this evening. I will now invite parish representatives to address this committee. You will each have a period of 3 minutes. First to speak, I have Councillor Vanessa Jones as Chairman of Bredhurst Parish Council. If you would like to come to the front, please. Thank you very much. You have 3 minutes.
Bredhurst is a small village in the AOMB, 6 miles north of Maidstone. We have roughly 170 houses and the village is surrounded by fields and 600 acres of ancient woodland. The Lidsing development of over 2,000 houses is within 100 metres of our boundary and it will destroy our village and its character. Your local plan states the proposed new junction to the M2 is a key element of the development, but that it could significantly have adverse effects on the area. Building a new motorway junction in the AOMB is an utter disgrace. The designation is in place to protect the landscape and could well be used against you in your own wards by other developers wanting to ignore the designation. Your plan assumes people travelling to Maidstone will use the M2 and Bluebell Hill. Nobody locally would ever dream of taking such a convoluted route. The link to the M2 will not help people get to Rainham train station. They will travel through Bredhurst and Hempstead. Our village can barely stand the amount of traffic that goes on our roads now. It simply cannot take additional traffic from 2,000 houses. It's utter nonsense to believe this new road will ease problems on our roads. It will not. The road runs only metres from 2 Grade 2 listed buildings. Your plan says both buildings appear highly vulnerable and would be likely to result in harm. It seems you do not respect the national designation put in place to protect our countryside or our historic buildings. Actually, the road's main purpose is not just to access Lidsing, but to open up the area to join with Gibraltar Farm and East Hill, both developments which the proposer of Lidsing has been trying to get permission for years, but which Medway Council have steadfastly opposed. By approving Lidsing, you will be giving the green light for all 3 developments, so it's not 2,000 houses you are considering tonight, but it's actually over 3,000. Your plan has page after page of improvements for Medway. How does Maidstone Borough Council have the audacity to tell another authority what is good for them? We understand Medway have informed you that they will not cooperate with you on numerous areas in the plan. They do not want your help or your houses, and Bredhurst completely agrees with them. We understand some councillors in the south of this borough often view residents in the north as the poor relations. If you vote this plan through tonight, you may find in future when you're looking for support or hoping for a majority-led council that voters in the north will look to other parties other than traditionally voting Tory. There are 3 seats in Boxley Ward which could easily change colour at the next election if you dump your houses in our area. We know other parties are sympathetic to our plight. You need to start listening to residents or your days of a Tory-led council could be numbered.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. I now call upon Councillor Peter Cooling as Vice Chairman of Maidstone Calc, if you would like to speak now. Councillor Cooling, you have 3 minutes when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am Vice Chairman, Maidstone Calc. At your meeting on 21st of September, it was proposed that there should be no yellow pages, Part 2, for local plan review matters, strongly supported by most members. However, in Part 2 of this meeting, you will receive statements of common ground, but now noting you may be having some earlier partial discussions. Agenda item 15 briefing makes clear that even though some of the draft statements were only issued to the other party in September, quotes, in most cases the drafts are at a relatively advanced stage, close quotes. In paragraph 2.11 of agenda item 15 briefing, the statements will be, quotes, published as working drafts once agreement has been received from the other parties, close quotes. That indicates the possibility of subsequent change, so will they be agreed or not? Will any subsequent changes have impact on other aspects of Reg 19? Are they not actually signed off because of relaxed timescales and insufficient priority for duty to cooperate interactions? While the statements may not be signed off and may change before signature, as they are at a relatively advanced stage, surely they must be visible to those who will be consulted on Reg 19 documentation if, on Wednesday, the Council approves publication for consultation. If not made visible to the public this evening, will you really recommend Reg 19 to Council, given the importance of those statements and the likelihood they will not advance before Wednesday? Further, in Part 2, your committee is only being asked to note the statements, with comment change apparently not being invited. That is rather dismissive of this committee's role to decide with advice from officers. As for the Reg 19 draft, it is a result of extensive analysis and huge preparatory effort for which councillors should be thanked. While Maidstone Calc cannot comment on any specific site, we note that if a site is removed, the number of homes it represents must be made up elsewhere so that the government-required housing target can be met. However, we note on page 67 that policy SP5 brackets A, development in the Leeds Langley corridor, is safeguarding a section of land which, quote, will be required to provide a quantum of enabling development, close quotes. So if the Leeds Langley Relief Road does proceed, there's a good chance that yet more homes will be built than the numbers proposed in Reg 19. Where is the logic? Either that road is contemplated and warrants the inclusion of an estimated number of homes partially to finance it, with some other sites removed, or it is not contemplated, in which case this policy should be removed. Which is it? We watch with interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cooling. I now invite Phil Coyne and Mark Edgerton to introduce the report. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Before I bring Mark in, I'm going to spend a few minutes just doing some background. There's obviously a very long background to the report that's in front of members this evening. The draft plan that members have in front of them tonight is comprehensive in providing the framework for investment and growth in housing, employment, retail, commercial uses, and critically, all of the community and social infrastructure necessary to make that work. And that is from the perspective of both residents and those that we will be wanting to invest. But it would be naive for me to even suggest that this is not contentious. Of particular concern to local communities and most certainly to elected members on both this committee and across the council and parish councils indeed has been the level of growth that we've been forced, the level of housing growth that we've been forced to plan for. It's equally important to remind people that the achievements of the scale of housing growth required is not something that is within the council's control. Indeed, failure to provide housing growth required comes at the cost of being without an adopted local plan and at the behest of what is commonly known as the presumption in favour or the tilted balance, or whatever one cares to call it. But for clarity, what this means is that in the absence of a local plan, it weakens the council's position very, very significantly in attempting to defend appeals against refusals of planning consents. And equally weakens the council's ability to ensure that development provides the infrastructure and other facilities necessary to mitigate the impacts of new development and also to capture the benefits that may be available. I'm sure that many members here tonight will have heard me say previously that the development industry is quite sophisticated, and during any period of non-plan coverage, the first thing that the industry will do will be to go after the sites that developers know would be unlikely to receive an allocation when a plan is in place. So there is a lot at stake here. So accepting that we're on a journey here whose route is not entirely of our own choosing, I'll briefly describe the process to members that the local planning authority has followed since the call for sites in 2019. Firstly, it's important to point out that amongst the call for sites was the Heathlands Garden Community proposal, which was at that point promoted by the council corporately. It was for that reason that the interim director post, which I'm currently carrying out, was created in order to ensure that any conflict of interest between the council as site promoter and the local planning authority was avoided. The call for sites process yielded a very significant amount of sites, amongst which 9 were as a response to the Council's invitation for expressions of interest around what have quite commonly now become known as garden communities. The 2017 plan had sought to meet growth on a dispersed basis. The invitation for expressions of interest in these larger scale proposals was in part at least a recognition that the anticipated growth in housing numbers would require a different approach and would benefit from development of a nature which facilitated levels of land value capture of a scale that would enable it to meet its own infrastructure requirements and bring new facilities. The 9 initial expressions of interest in garden community scale proposals were quickly whittled down to 7 through the amalgamation of sites. These were a group of sites at the north of Staplehurst, a site called Pagehurst Farm, the Leedsing scheme, Binbury Park, north of Marden, the Leeds-Langley corridor and Heathlands. In evaluating these sites, the local planning authority went through a 2-stage process using independent consultants. The first stage was a suitability assessment which discounted sites at Staplehurst, Pagehurst Farm and Binbury. Pagehurst Farm had not provided sufficient information for assessment. The Staplehurst sites were judged to be too linear in nature to provide coherent development of the scale that we needed. And because Binbury was in the AONB, it was felt that the availability of other sites would make this difficult to justify. So the 4 remaining sites were then subjected to a further deliverability and viability assessment by the same independent consultants. These were the sites at Leeds Langley were felt not to be deliverable within the planned period due to the need for significant infrastructure. And I'll come on to that in a few minutes. But the assessment found that the 3 remaining sites at north of Marden, Heathlands and Leedsing were all subject to further work, were all viable and were all deliverable. So with the results of the call for sites completed, including garden community scale proposals and the other smaller sites across the borough, there were choices in terms of the spatial strategy that the borough would pursue. Now, there was context to this in that there were concerns, as I mentioned a few moments ago, around the dispersed approach and its ability to provide infrastructure at the right time and in the right place. Concerns over traffic issues across the borough, but particularly in the south. And also at that time there was a need to avoid any delay in preparing the plan because we were unsure about the timing of new planning guidance from central governments. So the result of considerations around future development patterns was a decision that 3 garden community scale proposals would present too great a risk to the plan in the eyes of an inspector and equally could present the council with difficulty in planning for the correct number of houses, particularly in ensuring that we maintained a 5-year housing supply in the early years of the plan. So for this reason, the spatial strategy before members this evening is based on a continuation of the dispersed approach in the early years of the plan, and with 2 garden community scale proposals delivering units at volume at the back end of the plan. The 2 garden communities proposed are Leedsing to the north of the borough and Heathlands to the east. The Leedsing scheme delivers 1,200 units within the planned period and a further 700 in the next planned period. The scheme provides major green infrastructure in the form of a new country park which will serve both Maidstone residents and those from Medway. It also brings with it a new strategic connection to Junction 4 of the M2 and a very high quality regionally significant employment site at the same motorway junction. The scheme is also able to meet the Town and Country Planning Association community guidelines as to 1 job per dwelling. The Heathland scheme comprises approximately 5,000 dwellings, 1,500 of which will be in the current plan period. This means that Heathlands also delivers approximately 3,500 units into the next plan period. In addition, the Heathlands project will provide new infrastructure in the form of a very significant new country park, a new railway station on the Classic Line as the basis for a new village centre, and with scope to serve a wider area and 2 connections linking to the A20. The Heathland scheme will also bring with it very significant new employment. I would add here that in addition to the work that has gone into assessing the viability and deliverability of the garden communities in advance of the Regulation 18B consultation, work has continued since that time in further ensuring that the schemes are deliverable, and this work has continued to look at the key elements of infrastructure necessary to make the schemes work and to make sure that they are realistic and achievable. Indeed, and this has been mentioned earlier this evening, members will recall that at the SPY workshop we invited Ben Aspinall, the Managing Director of Aspinall Verdi, who have done our all-plan viability appraisal, who confirmed to members that in their view that both of the schemes were viable and deliverable, and that the promoters were in a position to assemble the necessary land and to bring forward the schemes and deliver infrastructure. In addition to the employment land provision of the 2 garden communities, the plan also seeks to allocate land at various points across the borough and actually overachieves on the target levels on the basis that as we come out of the sort of recent economic setbacks, that it's the areas with the best choice in the market that will fare best for investment. Finally, on the garden communities, I would say that all of the garden communities have a proposal in the plan that we will do supplementary planning documents post Reg 19. This will mean that there will be an opportunity for further engagement with local communities on the finer detail of how those developments propose. So finally, before I invite Mark to take members through the report, I would just like quickly to draw attention to the proposed safeguarded area along the Leeds-Langley corridor. Members will be aware of the long history to this proposal, and particularly of the condition attached to the 2017 plan by the inspector, requiring feasibility of the route to be evaluated. So a brief background to the current safeguarded area is that Kent County Council's Highway Authority has confirmed that whilst it has explored route options in this corridor, and whilst they pass the necessary threshold in cost-benefit terms, they do not reach a sufficient threshold to justify pursual of a new route purely on highway grounds. However, the County Council has also confirmed that should Maidstone be able to demonstrate that a route in this corridor is necessary to support development, they will consider lending their CPO, their compulsory purchase powers, and will assist in the preparation of funding bids. So, as part of the local plan review, we've commissioned an independent piece of work to assess the optimum route for any new highway infrastructure in order to support developments in the corridor. Importantly, in commencing this work, our advice was that in order to ensure that an inspector would be happy to attain the safeguarded area at this location, and notwithstanding any third-party funding sources that may be available at the point where we seek to bring it forward, that we would need to demonstrate for the purposes of a high-level business case that the route could effectively self-fund. So the study has modelled a corridor on approximately 4,000 units and confirms that at this level the corridor can provide road infrastructure along with all the other requirements such as education, health, open space, etc. But it is important to remember that this modelling work is very high level, and were this proposal to be pursued, there would be a very strong likelihood that it would achieve external funding. So we should not become overly focused on the number of units, as this is purely for modelling at this point. Finally, I would stress that there are no units in this corridor factored into this planned period, but the safeguarded status we are seeking is important, as it would only take 1 or 2 developments to come forward at either end of the corridor that would actually inhibit the potential for the route going forward, or to potentially add very significantly to its cost. So that's the background to the spatial strategy, Chair, and I'll hand over to Mark now to take members through the report.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Coyne. Whilst the report is comprehensive, I will provide some context and summary to members regarding these proposals. Members will be aware that as local planning authority, we operate within the government's top-down planning system. It's the government that sets the framework for our activities and sets out the requirements that we must meet. We must produce a local plan, and we should seek to review this every 5 years to meet the government's expectations. Tonight's report illustrates how Maidstone is therefore attempting to fulfil the government's planning requirements. The government also sets the framework regarding the content of the local plan review. This is why, no matter what happens to our draft local plan review documents in the meantime, it's an inspector appointed by the Secretary of State who will decide whether our proposals are acceptable, and this will take place by way of a future independent examination. And the inspector will consider our proposals under two main banners, the tests of soundness and their legal compliance. To illustrate this, one of the most important matters will be the ability of the local planning authority to demonstrate it is meeting housing need through these local plan review documents. Housing need is now calculated through the government's standard formula. And I don't need to remind members that the introduction of the standard formula has seen Maidstone Borough's housing need rise sharply from 883 units per annum to approximately 1,200 units per annum. As we've seen elsewhere, where an authority doesn't meet need through their local plans or local plan reviews, the plan is simply found unsound or even rejected for examination, and they have to redo their work. In the meantime, because the council would fail to meet its housing requirements, it will be subject, as Mr Coyne has noted, to planning by appeal, a free-for-all for developers effectively as sites are refused by Maidstone Borough Council and they're granted on appeal. In those circumstances, we may also not see required improvements to infrastructure that would normally be negotiated through site allocations and planning approvals. In addition, as has happened elsewhere in Kent, the authority could also be put into special measures. However, as I've noted, Maidstone is doing its best to meet the government's requirements, both in terms of production and content of the local plan review. In spring 2019, the local planning authority undertook a required and initial call for sites exercise. This exercise gave developers and landowners the opportunity to submit land that they wanted considered in the local plan review by the local planning authority, and these sites were published in autumn 2019 by the council. Other sites were submitted thereafter, up to the cut-off point imposed by the authority earlier this year, and those sites, all of them have been through a robust assessment process. In September 2019, we undertook a public consultation that sought views on the scope of the local plan review, as well as the themes and the issues that we should address. 550 responses were received and considered. And in December 2020, the local planning authority consulted again on the local plan review. This was the first occasion, though, that it presented proposals, including for meeting housing and other need, by way of a preferred approaches document. And this document was accompanied by an emerging evidence base that helped support the proposals. And over 3,000 responses were received and considered. Since then, additional evidence gathering work has been undertaken, and further consideration has been given to all components of the local plan review documents. The result is the regulation draft for submission documents that are presented for consideration this evening, along with the updated evidence base. The draft for submission documents represent the version of the local plan review that the local planning authority would submit for examination by the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State. I'm sure members don't need reminding that tonight's meeting is therefore not about granting any planning permission, but to give consideration to these draft for submission documents and evidence documents with regard to the recommendations in the report. It's also not for this committee to make the final decision on the proposed recommendations. The committee has asked that they recommend that full council decide on the recommendations. The local plan review draft for submission document is attached as Appendix 1 to the report, and the associated policies map is Appendix 2. The first recommendation of the report seeks to undertake a minimum 6-week public consultation on these documents, and this would commence on the 29th of October and finish on the 12th of December. In accordance with the fifth recommendation, there would also be a separate and concurrent consultation on the associated Suitability Appraisal document that we've heard from earlier in the evening, and this would be provided as Appendix 3 to the bundle. Public consultation on the draft for submission documents would be undertaken in accordance with the Council's adopted Statement of Community Involvement, which is published on the website, as well as legislative requirements. Those who have made representations previously will be notified at the appropriate time. An updated evidence base would be published with the Regulation 19 draft for submission documents. This would be used in conjunction with the already published evidence to support the Regulation 19 documents. The evidence documents are summarised as background documents 1 to 25 within the report, and a link to these documents is provided within section 9. Members will note that the evidence documents have regard to various matters, from the assessment of submitted sites, the need for different types of housing and employment, through to detailed studies regarding the garden community proposals. All plan assessments are also in the list, and including the latest iteration of the Suitability Appraisal, Habitat Regulations Assessment, and All Plan Viability Assessment. Recommendation 6 seeks a noting of these documents, a list of those documents within the evidence base, provided as background documents to the report. Also referred to for noting in Recommendation 6 are statements of common ground. We've heard about these earlier as well. These are working draft documents that have yet to be agreed by all parties, and so are provided as the exempt Appendix 4. They help demonstrate that the local planning authority has been engaged in ongoing, effective and active duty to cooperate with neighbouring authorities and other relevant prescribed bodies too. Given their role, it's intended that they are published as working drafts with the rest of the evidence base once agreement has been received from the other parties. Furthermore, additional amendments are anticipated, in most cases, prior to submission of the local plan review documents for independent examination. And a summary of the statements of common ground are actually provided within the report itself. The report also summarises the content of the Regulation 19 draft for submission document and the associated policies map. These proposals represent a significant review of the adopted local plan, which was adopted in October 2017, informed by various changing circumstances since then, including the significant uplift in housing need mentioned earlier, changes to the government's national planning policy framework, and also a new strategic plan for Maidstone Borough Council. Whilst no doubt much of the focus will be on local planning authorities' attempt to meet its required housing need, it should also be noted the local plan review, among other matters, seeks to improve job opportunities within the borough, bring investment into Maidstone Town Centre, and seeks to provide much needed infrastructure investment into the borough. Where possible, protect and enhance designated landscapes and wildlife designations, and help address the climate change and biodiversity emergency that has been declared by the Council. This is a real balancing act given the level of growth the Council is required to plan for. These matters are reflected in the vision and objectives that are contained within Chapter 4 of the draft for submission document. Mr. Coyne's provided an explanation of the spatial strategy, and the strategy accounts for growth in housing, employment and retail, and the new individual sites are summarised in paragraph 2.40 of the report. Garden communities will also play a significant role in these respects. They will allow the local planning authority to complement the dispersal approach carried from the adopted Local Plan 2017, which allocated sites across the south, the centre, the west and the east of the borough in particular. The plan also sets out the requirements associated with individual sites, as well as how the Local Plan 2017 sites combine with the Local Plan review sites. The sites themselves have been through a rigorous assessment process, both in terms of the matters set out in the published Strategic Land Availability Assessment, and also in respect of the spatial strategy, as set out in the spatial strategy topic paper in the evidence. The proposals have also been subject to various detailed and time-consuming assessments, including sustainability appraisal, transport modelling, and viability assessment. Given the fairly lengthy process in this regard, members have inputted on the proposals. Officers appreciate, however, these are difficult local issues, and matters have been drawn to our attention, including site allocations, say in Cox Heath, where the policy and allocation to the east has been strengthened to ensure anti-coalescence strip is in place. However, given the above process, as well as the impact the changes would have on the local plan review production timeline and cost, officers advise that members should resist changes to sites at this stage. However, should anyone still have concerns in this regard, we would advise that they utilise the Regulation 19 consultation process, which is being sought through this report. Another key component of the local plan review as set out within the report is the inclusion of topic-based policies. These take two forms. There's strategic and non-strategic, and they're primarily used for development management purposes, the assessment of planning applications and such. It's these policies that set out approaches and expectations on matters such as climate change, transport, housing, and employment types, and gypsies and travellers, for example. The local plan review is not intended to be the sole future planning document in the local planning authority's list. A number of documents are carried forward, and a new series of supplementary planning documents, as noted by Mr Coyne, are proposed and set out in the detailed requirements for larger scale developments, such as the garden communities and Invicta Barracks. Development plan documents are proposed to tackle gypsy and traveller provision, as well as detailed design and sustainability matters. There's also reference to the need for an updated community infrastructure levy charging schedule to help ensure developers to continue to play their part in meeting wider infrastructure requirements. The local plan review draft for submission document and policy map are detailed and lengthy in their nature, and officers have received a number of comments highlighting factual anomalies or minor amendments, such as graphics, layout, spelling and grammatical matters. And for this reason, recommendation 4 seeks delegated authority to make the changes to the document. There are also a number of more detailed amendments to the proposals contained within the documents that have been highlighted since publication for this committee, and they're, as we've noted already, contained in the urgent update. Should the Regulation 19 consultation be approved, consideration will be given to the responses and material changes required to the draft for submission documents will be collated into something called main modifications. The decision to proceed with submission of the documents is a matter for full council in accordance with Recommendation 2. Recommendation 3 of the report, though, seeks granting of delegated powers for this committee by full council in an effort to expedite the process in respect of the schedule of main modifications. Members should also note the urgent update associated with this recommendation, which slightly changes its wording and supersedes the version which is contained in the report. Thank you again, Chairman, and officers are on hand to help answer any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark and Phil. I now call upon Councillor Hinder to speak as a visiting member.
Thank you very much, Chair. It seems to be that the big problem, and I don't envy you members sat there this evening with your having to make the decision, but the big problem is that society doesn't listen to what residents want. And it's interesting that recently the government appear now to have changed tack slightly and are intimating that they are more prepared to listen to what residents want. And this is the main issue that the residents in my ward suffer from. They feel that they haven't really been given the full opportunity to discuss and to put forward their viewpoint, and the viewpoint that they are putting forward is not being listened to. And this is causing strife amongst the locals and the communities. It's interesting, I find that very recently, and I'm talking within the last week or so, that an article appeared whereby Maidstone Borough Council were feeling aggrieved and complaining that Tonbridge and Malling Borough Council had approved an application on Hermitage Lane, and Maidstone were complaining about the effect on them and it being on their border. Yet I find it dismaying that Medway are being put upon, and Medway are complaining quite vociferously, I hear, about this particular application being on their border. And whilst I accept that duty of care and considerations is taking place, there are discussions between the two councils. That meets the criteria of having discussions, but does it meet the criteria of both authorities coming to some sort of agreement? And my understanding is that they are not coming to any real agreement between them. And this, I think, is a big failure with the current system. I don't envy your decisions, members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hinder. Next to speak will be virtually Councillor Janetta Sams. I invite you to address the committee as a visiting member on the webcast? Councillor Sams?
Apologies, members.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, members. To save a little time tonight, I'm reading this out on behalf of Councillor Tom Sams and myself regarding communities. We've spent much time talking to the old SPI committee about process being democratic and transparent. It's now a relatively new SPI committee and a new chairman to take on a new journey, and we appreciate this is not an easy task for council to take on. The garden communities selected are at the furthest parts of the borough and have been selected for some may believe political expediency. On the borders of the Medway Council to the north and bordering Ashford to the east, and selected ahead of others through a process unknown to us and lacking, many believe, any meaningful transparency. Some indeed believe they were selected probably 2 to 3 years ago and then a justification for their selection had to be made. We certainly believe a case can be made for that argument. This may come out at some point. We have been contacted by so many residents from the Medway end of the borough, they feel frustrated and not listened to. They have a greater affinity to Medway rather than Maidstone, and they feel estranged from a process which seems to have forgotten them. Well, we know how this feels as Lenham Parish Council, the Soul Group, residents and us as Borough Council members have been travelling on a path, frustratingly watching the Heathlands proposal unleashed on our community. We've attended many meetings and listened to councillors frustratingly fail to scrutinise its own proposal, reliant on vague reports and unfortunately failing to listen to concerns raised. A bit like the Titanic, this council has continued its journey oblivious to the impending dangers. Again, we won't take much time as we know that Seoul and Lenham Parish Council will articulate the message once again tonight and on Wednesday at the full council meeting. But we are extremely disappointed that MBC, through that Policy and Resources Committee, which some of you have served on, has allowed Heathlands to be put forward in its name at significant expense to this plan. The infrastructure requirements are so vague and imprecise. The provision of jobs promised is frighteningly optimistic and fanciful. It is flawed, and unfortunately we repeat that we believe it will lead to the failure of the local plan. The Heathlands proposal is almost entirely based on car usage and completely at odds with this council's commitment to climate change and our new, as we learnt, do aspiration, so significantly important to this council, laid down by the leader last week. We have throughout tried to be positive and obtain as much information as possible for ourselves and for it to be available to the public. Unfortunately, this has been difficult. We believe there is insufficient detail for residents to be consulted upon. Members, we feel that currently the plan before you, if approved tonight, will fail. The garden communities included will fail, and we have to restart the process. We will have to restart the process under orders from the inspector. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sams. I now call upon Councillor Harwood to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for allowing me to speak. Just to set a little bit of context, for the first local plan that Maidstone Borough Council signed off in 1993, I chaired what was then the Planning Policy and Operations Committee, and that body forensically went through that local plan line by line and actually drafted many of the policies. Subsequently, I chaired the local plans group which steered Local Plan 2000 home, and again they were forensically addressed, and many of the key landmark policies around countryside protection and so on were actually drafted by members with support of professional officers. And the only reason I state that is because in Mr. Edgerton's presentation, he stressed that we should not, or you as a committee, should not be changing the document, but it is completely within your gift to do that. Even the 2000 local plan was changed significantly to the level of the major allocations in the previous Planning and Transportation Committee and then in full council, Church Landway was removed in full council, the equivalent of the meeting scheduled for Wednesday night. So, that's certainly in your gift. My key concern, and the reason I've come in to address this committee, is that I sincerely believe that the Regulation 19 draft local plan will collapse under the weight of its own contradictions at any public inquiry. And I genuinely believe that. I mean, for example, that there is a lie right at the heart of this local plan when it describes the Maidstone Barracks site as being able to absorb 1,300 units. Anybody who knows Maidstone Barracks, the old Lushington estate, used to belong to Henry VII when it was Le Parc, will know that the previously developed quantum of that site is not extensive. 1,300 units, that's over a Vinters Park. That's more than a Grove Green. How on earth will that be fitted into that little wedge of land just to our north here? The constraints on the barracks site are legion. The site is historic parkland, as I say, dating back. It's a late medieval deer park, a large part of that site. There is development at the south and east of the barracks site, but the rest is rolling parkland with a grade 2-star listed building, Park House, and its setting, so there's a constraint. Most of the land is studded with veteran trees, which are protected by the MPPF, and there is beautiful woodland around the quarry at Quarry Wood. There is just not room for 1,300 units, and the reason why that's important to all of you is that when the inspector states the obvious, that 1,300 units cannot be shoehorned into that site, he will need to look, or she will need to look at other sites across the borough, and that's where the whole thing begins to unravel. And I think that's a really fundamental point. I'm also concerned that whereas on the kind of garden village sites that the council is promoting, in terms of its policy narrative, it talks about 20% net gain for biodiversity. It talks about all these protections. For some reason, at the barracks site, it does not say that it wants 20% net gain. In fact, it doesn't even have to say that there has to be open space. It says that there could be open space unless it goes off-site or it's negotiated. North Ward is the most efficient ward in open space and social communities, and everybody knows that. That's why this council commissioned a report into community facilities for North Ward. So it just won't work. And I think that this committee does need to address the issue of the former Lushington estate. I mean, interestingly, the site also has a global cultural significance because, of course, Alfred Lord Tennyson, he wrote many of his poems when he was staying there with his sister Celia. So I think that site needs to be looked at. There are some other concerns. We all know, effectively, that Maidstone's and the borough's rivers are at crisis point. Anybody who knows the River Belt, a triple SI river for a whole course in Maidstone Borough, and the River Len, which shares many features with
Councillor Harwood, you've now had 5 minutes.
Okay,
Please,
with places like Stobmarsh. And yet, this local plan, it talks about protecting Stobmarsh and the Medway marshes. So therefore, we need to look at this site. And then finally, because there's not very much time, on the Heathland site, we are looking at Country Park. A country park is outmoded. This needs to be a restoration of the landscape, and that's recreating woodland cover, that's getting the bogs and the marshes back in. And then finally, on the safeguarding of the Leeds Langley route, the big problem with that is that effectively this council is blighting a large area of countryside, and it is also undermining our climate and ecological emergency declaration. And again, the quantum of development that would need to be yielded to deliver a road in close proximity is so significant. It rides a coach and horses through all of the policies attached to this plan. Particularly the landscape of local value for the Len Valley. If you look at the proposals map for that landscape in the local plan you all have in front of you, it has a shaded area for the Safeguard Leeds Langley route right through the middle of it. And I genuinely am concerned that any inspector, if he supports the safeguarding, will throw out the landscape of local value because they're mutually exclusive. And that's the sort of detail that you as members tonight are going to have to pick out of this plan and address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harwood. Next to speak, I call upon Councillor Richard Webb, who is speaking virtually. Councillor Webb, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Coxheath in the current local plan and at the Regulation 18 stage was classed as a larger village. Now in this document it appears to have been upgraded to a rural service centre. This happened as well at the last local plan documents, but when it went to the inspector, they agreed to downgrade Coxheath to a larger village. So it seemed the planning team are determined to get Coxheath as a rural service centre rather than a larger village. There is no need for this change in the village status, except unfortunately to put more development into the Coxheath area. The allocation for Coxheath in this review has its main proposal to the east of the village and is shown for 85 dwellings. However, at the Regulation 18 stage, the proposals were for a few sites to the west of Coxheath towards the East Farley, with a dispersed spread of dwellings. With these sites to the west, there are several ways to travel into and out of the area, towards Teeson, down Dean Street, Gallants Lane, as well as through Coxheath to Linton Crossroads and the 229. However, with the sites to the east, if that is selected, then only the route to Linton Crossroads is a viable option, which, if you've been through Linton Crossroads, is over capacity already and does not need any more traffic sent that way. The site proposed as Beacon Park is for 85 dwellings, whereas when submitted in the call for sites, the option was for double that figure. While it is proposed to have an open space area in this development, once in the local plan, could we not expect a developer to increase this number of dwellings, and that would impede on the open space that is there and hinder the important anti-coalescence belt that would be created, or is there at the moment, between Coxheath and Lewes. Given all this, I would prefer the local plan reverts to the Regulation 18 plans that, whilst not perfect, had less of an impact in the area and to some extent had some support from more residents than this proposal would have. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Webb. Next, I call upon Councillor English to address the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the exception of Councillor Harwood, I'm probably the person who's been involved with local government longest. In fact, my first job was at Canterbury City Council working on their first ever local plan, which was very contentious. Never in all that time have I ever heard anyone suggest that members at a committee, when we are discussing a local plan, should not have the ability to change that plan. That's outrageous. Members may decide not to change anything here or at full council, that's our prerogative. But be aware that if we do not consider the option of changing something, we may actually be judicially reviewed because we haven't taken all the relevant considerations into account when reaching a decision. Now, let us go back to the actual issue this evening. Councillor Harwood was slightly wrong when he said he was chairman of Policy and Operations Group. I think it was actually the Structure and Local Plans Group subcommittee of the then Planning and Transportation Committee. He and I, with the help of a couple of Conservative members, wrote 2 local plans, and we didn't do it this way, I can assure you. This is the first opportunity members have had to make substantial changes to this document. The very first. Very different to the procedures we've had in the past. And changes need to be made. Let's look at a few things. Starting in no particular order with the Leeds Langley safeguarding proposal. We all have different views on whether a Leeds Langley bypass is the right solution. My personal view is it's a solution in search of a problem. However, be aware that if you put it in the current wording, it's effectively a blank check. You need to actually establish what sort of quantum development of housing is or isn't needed before you do the work, not the other way around. If you put it in the wording it is now, given that all sensible estimates from the development industry suggest that we're not talking about 4,000 houses, we're talking about 9 or 10, we will have difficulty resisting pressure for development in that corridor, whatever else we've done in the local plan. Then we turn to Invicta Barracks. Well, yes, Invicta Barracks has been looked at for allocation in the past, but not at these numbers and without any of the compensating open space policies and not without any affordable housing whatsoever. I mean, it's a very interesting policy document. Then we turn to garden communities. The government, when they first thought of garden communities, were talking about sustainable communities based not on the car, but on public transport, rail links, bus links. Well, there is a bus service from between Maidstone and Ashford, and not a bad one, but the ability to provide the rail links, for example, is highly questionable. In terms, so we look at some of these, we look at these allocations in terms of Lenham Heath, and I did support this at P&R because I thought we would have a frank and full discussion at this committee. Well, we haven't really, have we? What we have is this last opportunity to make some reservations. My reservations are very clear. I think this proposal is in serious danger, like the Lidsing proposal, of falling over at a public inquiry. It's very hard, if you look at the transport and highways analysis and all the other policies involved, to actually see why these are proposed on planning grounds ahead of certain other proposals. What I would say is if you are going to go ahead with a Lenham Heath proposal, for goodness sake, don't have a country park, have a nature reserve, a proper nature reserve. We went through all these issues between country parks and nature reserves when we looked at the Hale Park application, very controversial in Tovel. Country parks are tourist attractions with car parking, picnic tables, and all the paraphernalia. They generate just as much traffic as a housing development. Please don't go down that route.
English, you've now had 5 minutes. If you
I'm
could draw
now
your
about
comments
to
a
wrap
close.
up.
Thank you.
Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I think we do need a local plan policy. Sorry, local plan. We have to have one, but we do not have to have one quite so quickly that we adopt this abortion of a plan without making some changes.
Thank you very much, Councillor English. I now call upon Councillor Perry, who will speak on our webcast this evening. Councillor Perry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an incredibly difficult task and decision that members have to make, and I fully recognise that. But one thing I would say, and it's come out, I think, in the officer's report, the total reliance on the old dispersal policy was never going to work. It was one of the big flaws, I think, of the previous local plan, and I am pleased to see that that is no longer the case. There has to be a balance in all of this. None of us particularly want huge, I suspect, want huge developments on our back doorstep, but we have to recognise that we are dealing with extremely difficult and, should I say, high housing targets that have been set, as quite rightly said, it's a top-down approach. So we don't have a lot of choice. We can fight them, yes, but they are there, and we have to realise that. There's no cavalry coming over the hill with brownfield sites. We know that. We've looked all over the place for brownfield sites. And it's absolutely essential that we maintain our 5-year housing supply. If we don't have that, then we're in real trouble, and we all know that. So it's not an easy decision, and I fully understand that. One thing I would area where I do want to raise is the whole question of infrastructure. And I see it in my own ward in Staplehurst, but I see it in other wards as well. For instance, we do have an issue with drainage, with surface water and with foul water drainage. We know that the water treatment centre in our ward, my ward, is actually at capacity, but I see nothing in the in this papers to say what's being done about infrastructure. It just doesn't seem to be there, and I think the word vague was used, and I think it is a bit vague, I have to say, and that does give me great concern. I think Councillor Harwood's point about the rivers is also extremely important. We have a triple SI with the river belt, and I think possible pollution of that is a real worry, and if we don't sort out the drainage and the complex drainage systems and provide water treatment centres, then we are going to be in trouble. Now, I note in the study that you liaise with Southern Water. That doesn't give me a lot of, how shall I put, well, I remain concerned about that, put it that way. I think we need to take that into account because it's a very important issue. I have to say this is a difficult balance, and I understand all the points that have just been made. I think at the end of the day, we're under a very tight timetable here, a very tight timetable, and we have to recognize that it's not perfect. This whole proposal is not perfect, but for the reasons I'm saying, I think we have to go ahead, and I am predisposed. I'm not predetermined, so if the lawyers are present, please note, but I am predisposed that I think this has to go ahead. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Perry, thank you very much for your contribution. I now call upon Councillor Round to speak as a visitor member who is going to address the committee via the webcast. Councillor Round, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. Am I coming through okay?
You're coming through perfectly, thank you.
Thank you. It's just I'm getting a lot of feedback at my end. I can't actually hear myself talk properly. I'm probably here wearing a couple of hats, and on the basis of the fact that a number of council members have already stolen some of my lines, namely Councillor Perry in Staplehurst, where we've got many common issues in Headcorn area. I'll try and lessen what I initially was going to say. But let me take Headcorn as a ward member first. Unlike Staplehurst is having many of their houses already built from the previous local plan. Most of the houses have already been built in Headcorn, and we've got a few more to come in this local plan review. So what have we gained from all this local planning issue? Well, yeah, we've had about nearly 1,000 houses and 2,500 people. We've had a 2-form entry school, a set of traffic lights, a level crossing and improved sewers, and that's about it. We've had a few Section 106s to give us new play equipment. We can't take any more swings and roundabouts, thank you very much. We've had ample enough as it is. Yeah, we've had a couple of little open spaces, but now I can wear my other hat as Chair of Economic Development and Leisure. Where are our community centres? Where are our facilities? Where are our sports facilities? All I am getting is shouting from all our sports clubs and all our various other activity centres. Where can we go? What can we do? We can't play football. We can't extend the cricket club. We can't extend the tennis club. We've got a bowls club with a pavilion falling to pieces. And it's not good enough when we've got so many more people to try and accommodate. One of the cross-cutting measures of this paper says that we're going to improve, if anything, our health. Surely COVID's taught us a bit. We need to learn that health facilities need to be better, community facilities need to be better, and sports facilities need to be better. Added to which, look at the houses we've built. You can hardly call any of them who've got gardens. You've got about enough space to build a washing line and turn it round to dry off your underwear, quite frankly. That's all you've got in most of the gardens in Headcorn. It's simply not enough. We haven't got allotments. We really need to think about communities, not building housing for once. We need things like country parks, not just open spaces for dog walkers. There is a lot more work that needs to be done in this respect. And quite frankly, whilst I'm not going to moan about the numbers and the housing, I really think in Headcorn's case, you could have thought a bit better about some other options, because the other thing we desperately need is better housing for the young and those that really need some form of proper affordable housing. Added to which we need far better housing for the elderly, and particularly those who can afford to downsize, where they can live comfortably in energy saving homes. That doesn't really seem to be addressed, unless you can tell me otherwise, because quite frankly, I have not had enough time to read over 800 pages in the last few days. So therefore, where I am missing information, then it's because I can't read that amount of quantity in that short a time. I stand to be corrected on many issues, but please, can we actually use health, sport and leisure as a major consideration when planning communities? Because walking the dog is not what I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown, for your contribution. I'm aware that a number of members have reserved their right. So before I open up the floor for debate, do any of the other visiting members wish to speak? Councillor Bryant, would you wish? Apologies, and then Councillor Brindle. Sorry, Councillor Brindle, I didn't see your hand go up first. Councillor Bryant.
Thanks, Chairman. Hello, members. I'm a relatively new councillor. I was elected this year. I'm a councillor for Boxley. I've had a number of residents contact me asking me how they can oppose, what they need to do, and this is all very new to me. I also want to make a note that yesterday at Tory Party conference, the chairman noted that there has been a change in their feeling of how development should happen because of the disquiet in the south of England. So Mr Dowden noted yesterday that no government is perfect, but he'd like to think that we at least have the wisdom to listen to the people and the humility to learn how we can do better. And this is about not paving over the south of England. I would hope that members in this room and in the council would understand that they've been elected by the local people to support local people's views. In Medway, in Maidstone, where I have lived all my life, there have been a number of issues in the area. So when I was born, there were 3 or 4 hospitals in the area. There is now 1. St Bart's has been made into apartments. All Saints was flattened and houses were built. Canada House was flattened and houses were built. Medway Maritime Hospital, with which this area would have to go to is 100 years old. We are living in the 21st century. It cannot be that one ward, which I think is planned in the plan, can serve an additional ward, one additional ward at Medway, can serve 2,000 or 3,000 houses in this area, plus the number of thousands of people who already live there. I know a number of members have already mentioned a number of things relating to surface water, roads, infrastructure, and I wholeheartedly concur with those concerns, and those concerns are from our residents as well. That's all I have to say, but I would like people to really consider the residents in this. Thank you.
Councillor Bryant, thank you very much. Councillor Brindle.
Thank you, Chairman and members. I've read through most of the draft Regulation 19 documents, all 890 odd of them, focusing, I'm sure you will appreciate, on those that look at garden village sites. I need to be convinced that the overall effect on the residents of Boxley, Redhurst and indeed the wider area will not be compromised if the site at Leedsing in particular remains in the draft Regulation 19 document. I need reassurances and stronger evidence that sufficient mitigation has been achieved for, firstly, the additional impact on road networks, especially for those travelling to and from Maidstone via the villages of Boxley and Redhurst, which, for those of you who are not familiar with these villages, is a single track in some cases with many listed buildings fronting directly onto the road. I'm not certain how the offer of 100k made by the developer to improve the journeys through the villages of Redhurst and Boxley can be spent, given the nature of the local road network. There's also no mention of the inclusion of public transport to link the residents of Leedsing to the county town of Maidstone. The increased pressure that there will be on all branches of the medical profession, as residents of Leedsing will rely heavily on the services based in Medway Council's area. Similarly, the pressure that will be on school places, both primary and secondary. I know there are some plans for the Leedsing development, but again I suspect that, and I agree that the pupils will rely largely on the schools and colleges in Medway, or if placed in schools in Maidstone, in the Maidstone area, will increase the traffic flow to and from their homes. I do appreciate that we need an adopted plan to ensure we safeguard at least the lower number of houses required. But as I stated at the beginning, I need convincing that placing a garden settlement at Leedsing is doing the right thing for the residents, not only in my ward, but in the wider area. Thank you.
Councillor Brindle, thank you very much. I'm not aware of any other members who have expressed an interest to speak, or indeed who are in it. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. I cannot take interventions from members of the public. If you can, please, sir. Please, sir. If you do not sit down, I will ask you to leave. I'm now going to adjourn the meeting until further notice. Thank you very much. I will now reopen the meeting. Members of the public, I fully understand that feelings are running very high this evening. I am very cognizant of that. However, it is not helpful to anyone's cause, nor is it helpful to the debate that will go on this evening for there to be interventions from members of the public. If anyone else wishes to air their views in such a way, unfortunately, I will have to ask you to leave. I do understand, though, that actually the majority of people this evening have so far conducted themselves very well, but thank you for your understanding on that. Members of the committee, as chairman, I will be responsible for facilitating the debate this evening, and I am going to make sure that all members have got time to speak and have got an equal chance to express their views. I intend to take speakers in order that they indicate to speak. However, I will give a precedence in the event that members speak multiple times to calling members forward who have spoken the least. That doesn't mean that I will be excluding anybody, but I hope you understand that obviously we are on a, we have until 10:30 this evening to get through everything. I will also insist that questions come via me in the chair. So if officers or members wish to give a response to something that's been said, please indicate and I will call you to speak. This is just to try and stop a little bit of ping pong that's going on. Therefore, I will now open up the floor to any members who wish to speak. In the age-old tradition, if you do wish to speak, please pop your nameplate up and I will do my very best to call everybody in the order in which they have indicated. Does anybody wish to speak? Councillor Mumford, I think you got there first.
Yeah, it's just a question. We've had a lot of members speak tonight. There's been a number of issues, and rather than repeat those issues from the committee, could we invite the officers to speak on some of the points that have been brought up, i.e. the relief road? It's just a suggestion to be more effective.
I think that is a very wise suggestion, indeed, to avoid repeat questioning. Mark, Phil and Rob, are you in a position to respond to some of the questions that were mentioned, or would you like to be recapped on those?
Thank you, Chair. If I start, and then I'll hand over to Rob and Mark to come in sort of where they feel appropriate. Starting off with Councillor Hinder's comments. The agreement with Medway, we don't have an agreement with Medway. Medway have, as Councillor Hinder quite rightly said, Medway have objected to the plan, but the duty to cooperate is a duty to cooperate. It's not necessarily a duty to agree, and we are working with Medway's officers, and we do know the sorts of things that, should the development go ahead, they've provided us with some information on the sorts of items that they would be looking for in terms of Section 106 or other developer contributions in relation to health, schools, open space, etc. So we are dealing with that. Councillor Harwood, the number at Invicta is based on technical work. It's been reviewed by the consultants that done the all-plan viability work. Leeds Langley was picked up by a couple of members. We have done the work. That's a technical study conducted by a company called Stantec, and that has confirmed to us that at circa 4,000 houses that we could pay for a route on that corridor. So it's not a Trojan horse for 9,000 or 10,000 houses. And as I said when I introduced the report, there is every chance as well that when we start looking at third-party and external funding, such as the LEP or Homes England or whatever comes through other new government sources, that actually that number can be manipulated using other funding. Garden communities, obviously there's things like Councillor English's comments on the nature reserve rather than a country park, and on the garden communities we have put in the policy, we've said that there will be a supplementary planning document. Now the supplementary planning documents is the tool which puts the meats on the bones of what the thing will look like on the ground. So all of those sorts of items we can pick up through that mechanism. That they will be quite detailed. I can only really repeat what I said earlier on, in that we've done a very detailed piece of work on the infrastructure needs for the garden communities. We've done very detailed valuation work, both with their initially with Stantec, then with the garden communities cost consultants, then with our own all plan viability consultants. So we have, we've assured ourselves as best we can that they will stack up and they will be deliverable. We've taken advice from PINS on the process that we've used in assessing the garden communities on 2 occasions. We've taken high-level legal advice on 2 occasions, and the stuff that's come back nothing has told us that the process that we've used is not robust. Councillor Rand mentioned a series of things around infrastructure and affordable housing, and particularly some design issues and garden sizes, and also Councillor English mentioned sustainability. Now, we are, and members will recall from the last meeting of this committee, we are, in parallel with the local plan process, we are preparing a design and sustainability DPD, which this committee will be involved in, and will pick up quite a lot of the issues that were raised there as well. I'm just looking. The issue on Boxley that was raised around hospitals and healthcare. This is equally a frustration sometimes for officers as well, in that we can ask the CCGs what they need and we can make the contributions. What we can't actually do is physically make people build new facilities. Our view is that in the garden communities is that it shouldn't be contributions, it should actually be new built facilities, because we completely understand where people are coming from on that. Again, on the transport and public transport will form a big part of the garden community proposals. We will have to demonstrate to an inspector that public transport is a key element. The Heathlands proposal, the railway station at Heathlands, at the point where we need to be at Reg 19, the promoter has got confirmation from Network Rail that they are happy to work with them based on the outline business case to explore this going further. That is where we would expect to be at this stage in the process. As I say, public transport will be a key part of that going forward. I don't know if Mark or Rob or any of the others, we've got several members of the team with us virtually, if anyone's got anything to add.
Thank you, Chairman. Grateful to you. Just picking up on a point made around water and water quality. We've been in discussions with the Environment Agency in that regard, working quite closely with them, and we have set out our approach in a water quality paper, supplementary paper that has been published with the evidence base to address the issues, and sets out our approach in respect of that. In terms of the quality components, yes, absolutely. I mean, the government have recently changed the National Planning Policy Framework to have regard to design and design coding and so forth. And I think, everyone in this room would say that if something was going to be built, they would want it to be built to a high standard. The fact is that we have reflected those requirements within the document. We have a policy on design, but one of the things which is quite important is that we make a reference to a future document, a future development plan document, which will contain policies on design and sustainability as well, which will lead from the local plan review document if it is taken forward. I think also around the spatial strategy, just a point to be made there, I am very grateful to members for the work they have undertaken with officers over the last 2 to 3 years. You know, it's actually been, you know, a difficult process trying to meet the needs and so forth, but we've got to this point through really quite a significant amount of input from officers and from members of all shades and colours. So we're grateful as officers to members in that regard. And I would also reiterate a point that Phil was making. We have had discussions with a planning inspector to sort of get almost like a sort of independent check regarding the approaches we're taking, the way we formulated our spatial strategy. And the inspector seems fairly content with the approach which we're taking and the way we've gone about the spatial strategy in terms of the process. But I would also say that it's worth having regard to the spatial strategy topic paper as well, which was published as part of the evidence base for this committee and the background documents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Phil and Mark. Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, a number of residents and at least 2 councillors mentioned this council declaring a climate change emergency. It's declared a biodiversity and climate change emergency. So just echoing what Mr. Coyne said, I think quite rightly a couple of councillors picked out problems with our rivers, and you know, there's been particular problems in Kent if one compares it to the rest of England with periods of drought. So as Mr. Coyne said, it's the local plan review which we're discussing tonight is one what's called development plan document, but another important one is the non-spatial policies, DPD. As Mr. Coyne set out in his report to the last meeting of this committee, he's advocated that we go for a baseline study to look at basically where the problems are with reference to biodiversity. So we can, you know, focus in on those parts of the borough which are most in need of improvement in terms of biodiversity, and I think that's the point that certainly Councillor Harwood was making earlier. So what I'm trying to say is we're on course to meet that gap. I think a term you've used before, Chairman, is we're putting meat on the bones. You know, it's a process that we're following. And secondly, you know, again, quite rightly, councillors and residents have been concerned about the actual delivery of infrastructure. And as we all know, this is actually a review of the adopted local plan. If I pick on Linton Crossroads, you know, I think everybody would agree it's very much a congested junction. Back in, well, way before the adopted local plan was adopted, modelling work showed that the junction was heavily congested. Recently, we've done further modelling work, obviously with KCC Highways, and that has again showed that the crossroads is congested. But back in 2017, in the adopted local plan and in the infrastructure delivery plan, as it says on the tin, we've identified improvements to Linton Crossroads. Infrastructure can be provided, and indeed, the delivery of of capacity improvements to Linton Crossroads, just as an example, is roughly 50% Section 106 monies, a lot of which we've already collected, and the rest, because we are a community infrastructure levy authority, the rest is quite frankly up to councillors. There is a growing pot of money in terms of the community infrastructure levy, and where that gets allocated across the borough and on what forms of infrastructure will be in your hands. in the course of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Councillor Mumford, did that sort of answer the questions that you were hoping to be flushed out at this point?
Yeah, it was just giving the members that spoke the opportunity to have a reply, and as opposed to it getting lost in our debate.
Thank you very much. I have a number of members to speak. I will do my best to call them in the order in which they indicated. Next, I believe I have Councillor Spooner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've listened very carefully towards what's being said this evening. I don't want to repeat, I don't want to go over various issues that people have already raised, but I think every councillor here this evening is agonising over this evening's proceedings. It is an onerous responsibility to take this local plan forward. Successive governments, Labour, Coalition and Conservative, have tried to drive up the numbers of house building in this country. There is a national housing shortage, and government is putting increasing pressure upon local authorities to deliver that land for housing and all the associated infrastructure that needs to go with it. It is our onerous responsibility, or the Borough Council's onerous responsibility, to actually find the land where that land goes. Sorry, where that new housing and new development goes. The new housing and development will go somewhere. There is no way the Borough Council can stop it. The advantage of the local plan is that it gives the Borough Council an opportunity to control it in the best interest that it can and in the best way that suits local residents. The development is obviously, the local plan is obviously going to affect some residents more than others. But at the end of the day, we have 170 residents in Maidstone. And we have to look at the greater good for the greater number. I'm very concerned about some of the proposals in the local plan. Some of them I don't like. But at the end of the day, this local plan gives us an opportunity to control the development in the best interest of the community at large. If the local plan doesn't go forward, it's not going to stop the development coming forward at all. What will happen is we will lose our 5-year housing land supply. Developers and house builders will put in application after application. We will have a tsunami of applications coming in, which the inspectorate will grant permission for, because we won't have a housing land supply. So the essential decision we have to make this evening is whether we go ahead with the local plan, warts and all, and we've all got issues with it. I'm sure there's not a single councillor around this table this evening who hasn't got some big issue. But we either go forward with this plan as it is and do the best we can with it and have some control over what happens, or else we just roll over and we just say, this is a developer's charter, come in, do your worst. The development will go anywhere, not just in the areas that we've allocated at Heathlands or at Leeds. Applications can be submitted anywhere in the borough, and we have to look at the greater good of the 170,000 residents of the borough. That is our onerous responsibility. And on that basis, I'm happy to move, I won't say happy, I'm willing to move the first recommendation on the agenda, subject to the urgent updates. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Spooner. Members, it is now 7:30 and we have been in session for 2 hours. Therefore, I move that the meeting be temporarily adjourned for a period of 15 minutes for a short break. In that time, I will ask members to refrain from engaging in any discussions in relation to the business being considered of this meeting. Once the meeting reconvenes, each member will be asked if they are subject to any lobbying during the break. Whilst we break, members and officers, coffee will be served in the Mayor's Parlour. May I ask that you leave your papers, your agenda pack, on your desks, as it does contain confidential information. Thank you. Members, it is now just gone 7:45. I believe we've had 15 minutes, and I believe that every member is back in the room. Therefore, I reopen the meeting. As discussed before the meeting, I'm going to just ask, have any members been lobbied in the intervening period that we have adjourned? Just on the basis of total disclosure, I did have a conversation outside with a gentleman from DHA. I certainly wasn't lobbied, however. It was merely a discussion about chairing the meeting, and I had that discussion with Councillor Mumford. So if that could be noted, Councillor Clark.
Chairman, I think given that we had a break and given that members discussed amongst themselves or had some discussion amongst themselves in that break, I think it may, I would like to say that yes, I'll disclose that would be lobbying. I'm not sure whether it fully is in the spirit of lobbying, but I'd sooner be careful because of the fact that some discussion was taking place.
Councillor Clark, my sentiments entirely, so I suspect that is the case for everyone, if we can accept that. But if anyone has explicitly been lobbied, please say so now. No, that's fine. I'm going to continue. I do have a list of people who wish to speak. I will honour the order that it was originally put to me in. So that was Councillor Clark, then Councillor Grigg, then Councillor Garton, then Councillor Mackay. Subsequently, Councillor Webb has also indicated his wish to speak. And Councillor Spooner, is that a legacy request to speak? Your nameplate is up, or... No, not a problem at all. And then Councillor Mumford. So first and foremost, if I could invite Councillor Clark to speak, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that there's an elephant in the room, and it's a little bit above the borough. When we did our last local plan, we were looking at 883 homes per year. And I think at the time, residents in the borough were horrified of such a massive increase in housing numbers. We're now, the government is now forcing 1,214 per year with this local plan review. And it's not the council that is actually looking to increase those numbers. It really is the government pushing it down. There's talk about whether or not we have a 5-year housing supply and the fact that if we don't, it will become a developer's charter. Well, guess what? It's the government that has the gift to decide whether it's a development charter or not. And unfortunately, the framework which the government has set up punishes this borough because we are having to conform with a 40% increase, not because we necessarily believe that's the right thing to do, but the fact that it's actually being pushed down on us. Earlier this year, we were in a very big quandary because the government was going out on consultation, potentially increasing our numbers another 40%. And that's the reason why we're here today. We actually were in a position where we would lose our conformity to the process if we just carried on with our local plan review, given that consultation, and we potentially could have got into that developer's charter. So that's why we went out to Regulation 18B earlier than we would have done. And I will add that I was the one that proposed that we go to 18B, so we've actually got residents' consultation comments to consider as members. There was a big push in the spring not to go to 18B, but to go straight out to Regulation 19, which we're working on here this evening, just to hand this all over to the government inspector to review residents' comments and decide how to move forward with the local plan. So I'm very, very pleased that we were able to move forward and gain those consultation comments from residents. But when I look at the Regulation 19 document, I'm concerned about how little has changed from that consultation, and it does concern me. When I see the sort of the comments about the 1,300 units in the barracks, if there are genuine constraints on the barracks and feedback has been given, why is that going forward into Regulation 19 without some form of commentary on how that will that will impact that site. In terms of this Leeds Langley bypass part of the report, it's actually quite bizarre to me. We're sort of at a point where we're looking to build numbers, and we've actually, if anything, we've put in an additional 4,000 potential houses above everything that we're reviewing tonight. I mean, when I look at that map on 106, I can see the Leeds, the main road that goes through Leeds and onto the A20. And the one, I've been involved in the Leeds Langley bypass since 2013 at JTB and at KCC. And the one thing that I do know is that there is not a preferred route. And in actual fact, the route is very controversial. There are many people that say the route should go to the west of the main trunk road through Leeds from Langley. And there are those that say it should go to the right. There's concerns about the Leeds Castle estate as to whether or not the road will go alongside of their property. This is something which is very, very, very much up in the air. And yet, we've decided to take a massive, massive swathe of land and essentially say, let's somehow hold this for housing. And I really do feel quite perturbed about that, especially given in our last local plan, we had one allocation for employment, a single allocation for employment, and that was rejected by members because they felt that it had an impact on the AOMB. Well, guess what? When you look at this map, it's right on the centre of the northern part of this land. I really do find that we're essentially saying this area could support 4,000 houses. We haven't got a road. Do I think that we will get that road first before we get all of those houses? That's just not the way it works. We're going to, if we go forward, we put this in our plan. If it stays in there, you may as well say that we've reserved a place for 4,000 houses. It just seems unnecessary to put this into the local plan this way. If that route was genuinely being championed at KCC, they would work that route. They would get the funding for it. It's been many, many, many years that we've been talking about it. KCC is a highways authority. It's not up to the borough to say, let's earmark all of this land and hopefully we'll get a road. And I have noticed at the Joint Transport Board meetings for years now that certain members will say, of course we should have a Leeds Langley bypass along with some enabling development. And I constantly hear that term, with some enabling development. Well, I don't see this as being a road with some enabling development. I just see it as a large swathe of land that we're putting forward for 4,000 houses. And I'm just not sure that the local plan review is where we should be doing that. And in terms of certain sites, I'm sure you will hear more of this later, but you've got certain sites like Beacon Park in Cox Heath. Well, we went out to Regulation 18B, and you would expect residents to come forward and consult and say, this is what we think is good about this plan, this is what's bad about this plan. Well, how do we all of a sudden get a new site come into the plan that hasn't gone through that process right at the last minute? It almost seems perverse that that's happened like that. So we've actually got some element of this plan which is just being thrown in at the last minute to add some additional houses. I'm not sure that's the way to do it, and I'm very concerned about it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. Phil Coyne, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah. If I can pick up Councillor Clark's comments on the Leeds Langley route first. So KCC, as the Highway Authority, have pretty much said that, as things stand, they won't be promoting a highway route in the corridor because they don't think its role as a highway sort of will pass the cost-benefit threshold by a large enough margin. We still are carrying a condition in the existing plan imposed by the inspector to look at the feasibility of a route. The consultants that carried out the work for us did have sight of the routes that had been considered previously under cover of a non-disclosure agreement, hence the fact that they're not published quite rightly. Now, what the consultants working for us recognised immediately was a lot of the points actually that Councillor Clark raised around Leeds Castle and around the ancient woodland, and the need that if there was to be a road that would support development and was likely to get any support, that we needed to move it as far west as we could, away from the castle and the ancient woodland, which is what the safeguarded area does. The 4,000 houses, the reason for the 4,000 houses is that as part of our advisory work with the planning inspectorate, we were told that if we wanted to give ourselves the maximum chance of an inspector keeping this safeguarded area in the plan, that we would have to prove that it could completely self-fund without any reliance on other forms of funding. Now, I think I said earlier, we do know that in all likelihood, when we bring this forward, we probably would be able to access other funding, but we've done this piece of work on the basis that what would happen if that funding didn't exist. What that has shown is that there would be development land to the north and development land to the south, and there would be an opportunity then in the middle of those sort of blocks of development to actually increase the designations or to strengthen designations so that we avoid ribbon developments along the entirety of the route. The purpose of this safeguarded area is that if we dip below our 5-year land supply at some point, there's every chance that somebody will put forward one or more applications in isolation at the north or the south of the corridor. Even if we refuse them, they may get through on appeal for whatever reason, and they will probably only deal with their own highway needs. So, you know, potentially we lose the facility for the route, or we get to the point where we make it a lot more expensive. So the next at Reg 19, what the advisory visit told us was that we needed that high level business case, which is what we've got, but our intention would be, subject to committee and full council's views, would be that immediately after Reg 19 we continue to work with KCC to try and look at the exact alignment of a route, how that would work, so that by the time we get to examination, we'd actually have a much more robust story to tell an inspector. But in order to buy ourselves the time to do that, we've got to do the best we can to protect the corridor. So that's where we are on that. I'll ask Rob to talk about the Cox Heath site. I think one of the things I would say, sort of just in response to Councillor Clark's comment, is the fact that we've got sort of this one site that's been picked out. We have done an awful lot of work with members because we had more sites than we needed. That allowed us to do an awful lot of work with members around where we had more sites than we needed in certain areas, about what the most palatable sites would be. And you know, I think that's worked quite well for us. And you know, hopefully the fact that there are so few, okay, we've got the contention over the bigger sites, and I'm not being at all dismissive of that, because I know how contentious that is to people. But on a lot of the smaller sites, the fact that we've got fairly broad agreements, I think does say something for the process that we follow, Chair.
Not really. If I could ask Rob Sharman to answer your next question so that we can get through tonight. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd say, you know, as Councillor Clark mentioned himself, you know, I do think it was the right decision to go out to consultation on the Regulation 18, and as part of that consultation exercise, we met with site promoters. And going back to Mr. Coyne's sort of central point, obviously we've got sustainability criteria. Through discussions with site promoters, there was a question mark about the 3 small sites to the west of Coxheath. In straightforward terms, I think there was a concern in isolation in that they were somewhat distant from Coxheath and being able to get to Coxheath by walk-in. So we had discussions, and as I understand it, one of the drivers for preferring at the time of Regulation 18B the 3 sites was that one of them was supposed to take a bus turning head. That was my understanding. So there were question marks about it, and we basically, because we have to be consistent, as Mr. Coyne said, across every single site, we looked again at the situation, and the site to the east of Coxheath, yes, we're totally cognizant of maintaining a substantial gap between Coxheath and Linton Crossroads, and we felt that that was maintained, and as I think Mr. Coyne said again, in the policy we've got a buffer zone within the actual site allocation, so the distance between the built-up development and Linton Crossroads is even greater. Directly opposite the site is the new doctor's surgery, which is being built. Directly opposite, on both sides, of bus stops. I think it would be hard to criticise significantly its sustainable location, and that's a consistent measurement we've applied to all sites. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, you did indicate you wish to come back. I will allow you to come back briefly.
I want to come back about the Leeds Langley, because I do feel that there's a level of predetermination on this plan. I think that for this to go out to consultation, which I do not think that it should be in this document, it really ought to have a wider boundary that gives the option of either side of that road. Because I know that when I've spoken to people that are very passionate about the Leeds Langley bypass, you talk to some people and you say there are 2 options. There's the west option and there's the east option. Half of the people you speak to will say, oh no, you wouldn't go to the east, you'd go to the west. And then other people will say, oh no, you wouldn't go to the west, you'd go to the east. So I think that is a massive level of unresolved, it's something that is absolutely unresolved. And even KCC has said that that's unresolved, and it is one of the issues that has taken the time that we've taken on this Leeds Langley bypass, and we still do not have a route. I would be interested to know whether, given that we have gone that side of the route, whether officers are aware that KCC does have a preferred route that has yet to become public.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. Phil Coyne, would you like to come back on that? And then I will move on to Councillor Grigg.
I will bow to Councillor Clark's much longer background on this than I have, Chair, but on the work that we've done, what we had to do, because of the standpoint that KCC took that they would not be promoting a route themselves, we had to look at what would be a route that would actually support build development in order to pay for it. And one of the things that threw up, which was some of the routes that had previously been assessed, because this isn't a criticism of the routes that had been looked at, but because they were worked up as highway routes rather than routes that would need to support build development, the view from our consultants was that they would be unlikely for a whole number of reasons to be able to support build developments, and this was the route that would be most likely to yield us the development we'd need to pay for the road.
Thank you very much, both of you, all 3 of you. Next to speak, I have Councillor Grigg, please.
Thank you. Hard decisions, someone said tonight. Impossible decisions, I would say. High housing targets forced on us by central government. And I think I would like to start by just giving a couple of assurances from myself. I have listened to residents and I will continue to do so. I've also fought for the public consultation and I certainly believe in democracy. However, I know and remember the dangers of not having a 5-year land supply and have been very vocal about the need to adopt a local plan at all costs to avoid this. But that doesn't mean that I personally haven't heard the hundreds of residents that have contacted me by email or not taken on board the speakers this evening and listened to every one of their concerns, which impact me very deeply. It also doesn't mean that I don't have my own serious concerns about this local plan and the problems that are definitely in it with some site allocations. And I am also going to mention tonight, as has Mr Edgerton, as has Councillor Richard Webb and Councillor Clark, about Beacons Park in Coxheath. It was put into the draft with no consultation with ward members or neighbouring wards, and that is not acceptable. Its consideration has not been the same as all the other site allocations. Yeah, I know what you said, Phil. I heard what you said about it can be fought at Regulation 19, and it will be fought at Regulation 19. But ever since I've been a councillor, we all know if it is in the local plan, it is not going to be easy to get it out. A tight timetable is no reason to put through a site that's going to have long-lasting effects on the area, and I can't accept that. Therefore, at this stage, Chairman, I would like to propose that if this draft goes forward this evening, it's with the deletion of that site.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grigg. You have proposed a motion which I note is seconded by Councillor Clark. Councillor Clark, do you wish to speak or do you wish to reserve your right? Thank you very much. I have a list of people wishing to speak. However, what I propose we do now is we take people who wish to speak on the proposed amendment before we continue the general debate. I'm not going to remove people from the list, but if you wish to speak on this amendment, please indicate your desire to speak now. So, Councillor Mackay.
I don't think we should be voting on such a narrow issue. There is so many important issues here tonight. 80 houses in Coxheath is not the issue we should be determining on. I wouldn't vote for this, I can tell you now, I wouldn't vote for it with or without the 85 houses in Coxheath.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else wish to speak on the proposed amendment? Councillor Webb.
Obviously, I have great sympathy with the point that Councillor Sue Grigg is making. If this proposal was carried tonight, and it was also carried at full council meeting on Wednesday, could officers please explain to me, because I've listened to experienced councillors tonight, I've listened to all the people that have spoken. Like Councillor Grigg, I have read all of the 298 emails that I have received. Why can we not propose a 6-month delay in the consultation of Regulation 18 so that we can consider at greater length and interrogate and challenge some, or if not all, of the detail within this proposal? I'd like to understand why, please.
Thank you very much. Phil Coyne, would you like to come back on this?
Yeah. Excuse me, Chair. I think to answer Councillor Webb's question on delay, I think we've sort of alluded to this, both myself and Mark previously, in that first of all, the delay in the plan would be likely to at some point drop us beneath our 5-year land supply, and obviously we've talked about the fact that then the sort of tilted balance comes into play, and our chances of planning appeals are reduced, and also people will try to bring forward sites that they know probably wouldn't get an allocation at a time where there's a plan. The other thing sort of around a delay of that sort of scale would be that we would have to go back and start to revisit some of the evidence base that might be time expired. So that could lengthen a delay and obviously would come at a cost. I don't know if Mark wants to add anything to that.
Yes, please, Mark, if you wish to speak.
Thank you very much, members. It would be a significant concern, I think, for everyone if the authority didn't progress in a timely manner, given the matters which Mr. Coyne has raised. I mentioned in the introduction, you know, what the sort of spectrum that exists between, you know, first of all, you know, you get put into an action plan, and then it's planning by appeal, and the developers get their charter, and then, you know, where does this go next? Officers keep an eye on the news, and you know, I was looking at what's been happening at South Oxfordshire. It's a very controversial area with their local plan, and I saw that you know, what the Secretary of State did there, saw that they weren't progressing, and I'm not saying that we'll be in the same position, but they didn't progress things for a while, and he contacted them to say that he would potentially take over planning powers from the authority if they didn't continue to progress their plan. It's an extreme example, but it does go to show how the government are prepared to do whatever it takes to ensure that these matters are pushed forward. Officers believe that the proposals here do represent, you know, the best efforts over a 2 to 3 year process, and you know, it isn't a matter, unfortunately, of just saying no to an individual site. We've formed a sort of coherent strategy. We've assessed the sites in detail, and to start changing that sort of thing now would require revisions to a number of the evidence-based documents and plan-wide assessments as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next to speak, I have Councillor Munford, and then Councillor Spooner, and then Councillor Garton, who have all indicated they wish to speak on this proposed amendment.
Yeah, because this thing with Coxheath has now ventured into something slightly more, I'd like to speak. We're doing the local plan review, not because the government changed the rules, because on the 2017 plan, the inspector said we had 4 years to do a review. So regardless of whether the government had changed the rules, we would be in this position because the inspector said that we need to do a review, and he also wanted to see the Leeds Langley bypass, or whatever you call it, relief road, to be developed or to have more meat on the bone that we had in 17. I think we're outside of that. The other day you looked at an agenda item which was the 5-year housing land supply, and I was shocked that we was down as low as 5.6, and I believe that we stand a chance, even on our own timetable, of spending time without a 5-year housing land supply. Anyone that has served on the planning committee, when you have got no local policies, because that's what it means, you can't apply any of your policies. You can try, but they all get trampled on at appeal, because there is something written in the MPPF that says if you have not got a 5-year housing land supply, then your policies are considered to be out of date. And I went through that period of time when we didn't have it, and the speculative applications that were going through that we would have normally turned down using our policies went through at appeal. The developers are sat there waiting for us not to have a 5-year housing land supply. We would get slaughtered. They are ready for us. We're already down to 5.6. Any delay in this will increase the amount of time I'm projecting we won't have one.
Thank you very much, Councillor Munford. Next to speak, I have Councillor Spooner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree entirely with what Councillor Mumford has just said. The developers, the house builders are out there sharpening their knives and waiting to come in. I have every sympathy with individual councillors and with local people who would like individual sites taken out of the plan at this stage. There's a particular site, it's not in my ward, but it's one looking at it from a pure planning point of view, I would like it taken out. That is land north of Ware Street. I think it creates a lot of potential planning problems, but at the end of the day, as a committee, I think rather than looking at individual sites, as Councillor, I've forgotten your name, sorry. Sir, yes, right, okay. It's just said, we have to look at the greater good of the greater number. And the prospects of a delay to perhaps remove 1, 2 or even 3 sites is a far too heavy a price to pay. We have to take this plan forward, I think, as it is. We're not happy with it, okay, but it's the best we can do in the circumstances. And it is a far better prospect for the people of Maidstone, the 170,000 of them. If we delay with the local plan, we are doing them a massive disservice. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Garton, please.
Being told by officers not to query specific sites at this stage of the plan and rather use Regulation 19 consultation to do so. I was a bit aghast by this suggestion because it is our purpose to discuss sites and discuss the details of this plan. And then Councillor Harwood and Councillor English, as visiting members earlier, said, not so quickly, let's discuss the detail of this plan. I would love to, but it was the Liberals who were pushing for Regulation 18B. I was sitting here with the previous chairman of the council 12 months ago, and we were trying not to go to Regulation 18B to give us more time at this end of the local plan making. So yeah, I will have to agree with officers tonight. Please do not discuss the detail of the plan at this point. We don't have the time for it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Garton. I've got Councillors Mackay and Clark to speak next. Would you like to? Absolutely fine. I was going to give you that option. Sir, it is up to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members? I think Mr. Spooner may have misunderstood my point. That I think there are way more important sites being proposed than the one in Cox Heath. I think Mr. Coyne has somewhat missed the point about the Leeds Langley bypass. There's a lot of support for the Leeds Langley bypass. There's probably not very much views on whether it goes east or west. People in the south, east of Maidstone want to see a relief road to take pressure off the Ashford Road, Willington Street and Sutton Road, but not at the cost of 4,000 houses. They'd be aghast if you said you can have your relief road, but you get 4,000 houses. Now, so I think you've completely missed the point. Now, that may be a pipe dream, but residents are entitled to a pipe dream. They assume that if a road is required, somehow the council of government will find some money. Then maybe we live in a more enlightened era. I'm also aghast to find that we have a site in Victor Barracks where we're proposing to build over 1,000 houses and not one of them will be a social housing. Why would that be? It's government land, presumably we're acquiring. So, you know, it's To be told, coming to a committee meeting tonight and to be told almost straight away, no, I don't want you making any amendments to this. You push it forward. Well, we push it forward, it's in the local plan. It's in the local plan and basically planning permission has been granted. That's the reality of what a plan is. You're green lighting that site. Now, I've spent probably the last 3 years banging on about my area, which is South East Maidstone, where in total nearly 3,000 houses were approved to be built along the Sutton Road. Now today we'd call that a garden community. I called it at the time pockets of isolation. And that permission came with certain conditions.
Councillor Mackay, we are speaking on the amendment at the moment.
Are we really?
We are. I will very gladly invite you to speak again and to make some of the points which I'm sure you have stored up. But if we could try and stick to
I think
Councillor Grigg's amendment.
All right. I'm against the amendment, as you know.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I take the point that Councillor Mackay has made about this being a relatively small site, but I think that there's a point here that needs to be bottomed out, and that is, this is not a site like all of the other sites that went to 18B. This is something that we're being told all of a sudden, oh, a change now, and it's going to impact the whole plan. This is the change. This has just come in. This is my colleague here, Councillor Grigg, knew nothing about it until we got these papers. This is very unique, and it may be small, but in the same way that one bad apple in a crop can ruin the crop, this one site can ruin the integrity of the local plan. Now, I'm reserving my view on the local plan because we've yet to have that discussion. We're just talking about the amendment. But I do think it is worth pulling this out and saying, how on earth did this happen quite like this? When we had so much member involvement going into Regulation 18B, we went out, the public had a chance to see what they were getting into in the local plan, and we asked them to give their comments. And yet, they give, and then they're completely blindsided because this comes to committee, we're beyond the consultation as far as the public's concerned, and yet we've got a site that actually does breach what would have been our anti-coalescence policies just a few years ago. So I do think that, yes, it's a small item, but I do think we have to look at the integrity of the plan in general. Until you put that to the side, let's have a think about it, that we've got an amendment, we'll vote on it in a moment, and we'll come back to the local plan.
Thank you very much. This is the only substantive motion on the table at the moment, so I think we have kind of got through the discussion of that. I'm not proposing that we vote at this point because that would essentially close down the debate, but perhaps if we could move on beyond the amendment that you've proposed, which is the only substantive
Chairman,
motion.
Can we just vote on the amendment?
I'm not sure that we can. I'm not sure we can. I would like to, but I'm not sure that the rules will allow us to. If I can just confer for one moment, we will, if I can seek some advice. Ryan will explain the technicalities.
The bit of these debates that everybody loves, how substantive motions and amendments works. So because there was nothing on the table, the fact that there was a report with recommendations in it, somebody has to move that. The first thing we had moved was from Councillor Grigg, which was to move essentially what was on the papers with the addition of removing that particular site. So that is the substantive motion. Okay, so that is on the table at the moment, as proposed by Councillor Grigg, with the removal of that Coxheath site. We're now at the stage where we could have an amendment added to that. Now you've debated that. Obviously, it's open for another member to move an amendment. You can only ever have one amendment at a time, but they could move to amend what it is that Councillor Grigg has proposed, which is, as I understand it, as per the papers, but with the removal of that particular site in the Coxheath area.
I'd like to make the amendment, which is just to delete that clause, and then we continue with the discussion on the local plan beyond that, so that we don't cut down further discussion. So at this stage, and there we go.
So what you are moving then is not what's on the papers. You are moving to amend what is in the papers with the removal of that particular site. Understood. So you're not moving what's in the papers. No, you just want to move just the bit that says let's remove Cox Heath site. Yeah. Okay. So that reduces it down. So that's the substantive motion that's on there. Is just to remove that. So you're just voting on that narrow amendment now to what's in the papers.
Thank you. We got there in the end, and I think this is what we all wanted. But thank you very much for everyone's advice. So, members of the committee, before we move on. I'm going to call a vote on the motion that Councillor Grigg proposed that was seconded by Councillor Clark, and that is essentially the deletion of the Beacons Park site from the recommendations. Is that understood by members? Okay. Can I ask all those members in favour? 3. All those members against? Members abstaining? The motion has been defeated, so we will, as suggested, continue now with obviously our discussion of what is on the table. Now, what I propose that we do is I move back to the order that I originally had, which will be Councillor Garton, Councillor Mackay, Councillor Webb, and then Councillor Mumford. So, Councillor Garton, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually would like to reserve my right to speak for a little bit later. I just have a very brief question to Mr. Coyne, which derived from his answers earlier. If we're taking Section 106 payment or possibly SIL payments for the Litzing development from the developer, now, are there any provisions being made that this 106 payment could be given to Medway Council for educational purposes, since we're talking a completely different county there? So we are not dealing with KCC, we're dealing with a unitary metri.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gardner. Phil Coyne, would you like to come back?
Yeah, we accept that the Litzing development would have an impact on and put pressure on services in Medway, and education would be it's one of the things that they have asked us to look at a contribution towards should it go ahead, and we will.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Next to speak, Councillor Mackay. I'm sorry to have interrupted you first time round.
I was quite enjoying my tirade previously.
So was I.
Got off the subject, really, didn't I? But I think I made my point on the Leeds Langley bypass. Get it out of the local plan. Get it off the table. Don't hang out a banana, don't even suggest it's there if it's 4,000 houses, 10,000 houses or whatever. No one wants houses in that corridor. But they want a road. They want everything, by the way, Mr. Coyne. It's your job to deliver. Yeah? We're together with KCC, Rob Jarman and the chairman here. All right, I'll leave it with you. All right? I'll repeat my point about Invicta Barracks. How can you propose over 1,000 houses without any social housing? I'm sure Mr. Register, say it's too expensive, but I thought we got over that barrier. But getting back to the point I was going to make, currently now, there'll be over 3,000 houses built along the Sutton Road corridor. And when they were approved in the first place, there was conditions placed within the local plan. Bus prioritisation measures. No, we haven't seen any of those. Improvements to capacity at junction of Willington Street, Wallace Avenue? No. Now, I could go on. Yeah? But now, in our revision, do we not look back at the original plan and say, what have we done? No, we haven't. We just said, right, we've got to build another 5,000 houses or 10,000. Come on. If you're going to say strategic highway planning permissions are based upon doing this work, it makes the plan almost pointless, unbelievable. I've read the consultations with other authorities. And of course, and it was basically, of course we're going to agree with you unless we disagree with you. Yeah, it's, you know. So we've got one council that's definitely said they're going to disagree with us. But the devil's going to be in the detail. You know, I think we are being rushed. I feel as if I'm being rushed. At one time we were so ahead of the game. I want to have some time for reflection and look at some of these things again. I may not be asking for 6 months, but I want time. Because if we approve this and this goes to council, we've almost signed a blank cheque. And I don't want to be signing that. So I'm saying here and now, no, I think we should not approve tonight. But I do understand the urgency of the work we're doing here. So I'm not delaying indefinitely. And I know that no one's going to get all their own way.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mackay. Oh, sir, Phil Coyne, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, sure. If I can pick up a couple of Councillor Mackay's comments. On the affordable housing issue on Invicta, one of the things that the all-plan viability assessment has come back and told us, and we know this from our own involvement in the market, in schemes as well as a council, is that because the relatively high land prices, and Rob will bear this out from a DM perspective, it's very, very difficult to achieve affordable housing as part of planning applications in the town centre. Now, what we're saying in this plan is not that we don't want affordable housing in the town centre, absolutely not. What we're saying is that in certain instances, in order to get development moving, we may need to accept that. But actually what we will do is, in the first instance, look to see what are the other mechanisms we can use, such as relaxation of some policies in order to increase viability. We could work with people to look at mixing development types to cross-subsidise, but it's certainly not saying that we don't want affordable housing, but it is saying that we are going to have to find new ways of delivering affordable housing in the town centre. We won't always get it. On the Leeds Langley Relief Road, I can only really say to that the safeguarded area is there as a safeguarded area, not in this plan, in order for us to do further investigation and to work with members of both KCC and Maidstone to see whether there is a viable route and viable development we can bring forward there. What I can say to Councillor Mackay is that KCC have been very, very clear that they will not be promoting this as a freestanding highway route. So that's I think there was a third point, Councillor Mackay, and sorry, off your latter point was
road improvements.
The road sorry, yeah, I do apologise. Yeah, now we are working with KCC, you know, all the time to push to get the improvements included in the Maidstone integrated transport package moving, and we are told that certain of those now are in the pipeline, but that is something that we are, you know, officers are working constantly on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mackay, would you like to come back briefly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would. Just on the first point, the fact that the developer overpaid for a site is irrelevant. The developer knew what the policy of this council was, and he paid a price for it. Our policy is our policy, irrespective of what the developer paid for it. He chose to pay whatever he paid for it. Our policy is our policy. It is not, presumably, a difficult site. It isn't, as far as I know, contaminated. But even if it was, I would say the developer knows what our policy is.
Just to pick up Councillor Mackay's point, yeah, developers do know what the policy is. The problem is that in a lot of instances, landowners sit on land on the basis of a sort of anticipated or a hope value of land. Town centre land is classically more expensive. Yeah, sorry, we're talking, yeah, and as part of the whole town centre work, Councillor Khan, the barracks will be carrying a lot of other things along with it. So it may well be that there is a negotiation in there. Mark, are you any closer to the detail on that?
Yeah, Mark, if you could.
Thank you, members. Yes, so we are in dialogue with the DIO, the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, who are seeking to release Invicta Barracks. What you'll notice, members, in regard to the proposals for Invicta Barracks is that we aren't saying, you know, we're finalising things now through this local plan review. We're moving things forward, they're turning into an allocation, but we're saying that we will be producing supplementary planning document to take forward the master planning and the detail in that regard as well. So this isn't the sort of the final sort of show in that regard. It's not the final bite of the cherry. The supplementary planning document will go through a required statutory process. It will allow us to work up the details, and it will allow us to have those detailed conversations with the DIO on all matters, including affordable housing. Thank you.
Phil, you have indicated you wish to come back.
Yeah, just very, very quickly to go back to, sorry, the wider debate on the town centre, also this issue of sort of trying to achieve affordable housing. That is one of the reasons that the council is now looking at a town centre strategy to look at how we can almost sort of maximise the interventions and choreograph and coordinate the interventions that we make to try and make sure that we overcome that very problem amongst other issues.
Thank you very much. Next, I move on to Councillor Webb, please.
Thought I had a loud enough voice anyway. Earlier in the meeting, Councillor Spooner made a proposal which I would like to second.
Yes, I apologise. Before I joined the meeting, indeed, there was a proposal on the table to accept the recommendations as per the pages, but that wasn't seconded, and quite rightly we did move on to Councillor Griggs. But if Councillor Spooner is still willing to propose, then I accept.
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Indeed, then I accept that there is now substantive motion on the table. I just wish to clarify. On recommendation number 3, there is a form of words in front of you which was distributed earlier today and was on your desk at the beginning of the meeting. So recommendation 3 now reads, and I will read it for the, not because I want to listen to my own voice, but so that there is absolutely no misunderstanding. Recommendation 3 is now grants delegated powers to the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee to submit a schedule of proposed main modifications which the committee believed to be acceptable arising from the consultation responses. In respect to the local plan review, draft a submission document and associated policies maps arising from representations made under Regulation 20 of the Town and Country Local Planning England Regulations 2012 as amended that the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government or the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Just to confirm, that is the slightly amended recommendation as was picked up in the urgent updates. Can I confirm that, Councillor Spinner, you have proposed that we accept all of the recommendations, including one I have read, and is that what you have seconded, Councillor Webb? Councillor Spinner, is that correct? Sorry?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we now have a substantive motion on the table. I will continue calling people in order that I have. So to my mind, I have Councillor Mumford, then Councillor Russell, and then Councillor Clark, please.
Yeah, I've listened to members tonight and problems about design, infrastructure, climate change and biodiversity. I believe I caught the officers saying that SIL is under review, and I assume SIL will be going up after that review. I'd like to know when that will be coming forward, because all of those designs, etc., or the provision of facilities are dependent upon SIL. And something else that is very important that I'd like to know when they're coming forward. We've spoken about SPDs, which we've just talked about. It is important that they come along at the same time as the local plan review. So I'd like to know when they're coming along. And DPDs as well, on the non-spatial. We're relying upon those for the climate change, biodiversity, etc. So I'd like some indication of where these other things are going to come in to reinforce the local plan review that we're discussing tonight, starting with SIL review. I've also, Mr. Chairman, got a proposal to amend one of the DM policies that I'd like to put through. I don't know whether I can do that now or not.
Absolutely. However, would it be helpful if Rob Jarman were to answer your question first, and then I will very gladly come back to you to propose that, if that's acceptable?
Yes, sorry, my point about SIL is that the money is there now. We brought in SIL a number of years ago, and obviously with certain exemptions, the pot of money in straightforward terms has been building up. So there's a substantial amount of money there today.
Thank you. I also have Philip Coyne, who has indicated he wishes to answer your question.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up Councillor Mumford's question on the DPDs and the SPDs, we will be bringing a report to the November meeting of the committee that will set out the timeline for the DPDs and the SPDs. When we, subject to the outcome of Reg 19, obviously, we will then be working with the promoters on the sites that are subject to those to agree the timelines of those, and we'll report those back to the committee accordingly.
And Mark Edgerton, do you?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to address the point regarding the community infrastructure levy side of things, yes, it's certainly the intention to update the community infrastructure levy charging schedule. The way things work in that regard, which is the way that Maidstone did things with the adopted local plan 2017, is that the community infrastructure levy charging schedule follows on from the key stages of the local plan production process. So what we will be doing, we'll be seeking to ensure that the proposals for the local plan review, if they're progressed, that they have some certainty. We'll consider what's happening with regard to the submission, the Regulation 19 and the consultation responses, and how we get on with examination. And then we'll be using similar evidence. We've commissioned evidence which is jointly for the local plan 2017 on this all plan viability, and will help us with the community infrastructure levy charging schedule update. And we'll use that evidence and amend it to take that forward afterwards. So we make sure that we're on a firm platform for the local plan review, and then we can use similar evidence as amended to take forward the community infrastructure levy as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, it was which I project to be an increase of SIL that I'm interested in, and you said after the local plan, but I hope all members are very aware that the SPDs and the DPDs are very, very important, along with the DM policies. And I sit on the back end of the DM policies with some of the members here at Planning Committee, and they need to be strong and as strong as we can make them, but they must not prevent development. And so within that, I've been going through the DM policies and looking at situations that we end up in planning permissions or planning committee for the speculative type of applications. I can't do a lot, but the one that I've always been involved in so many debates about was SP17, which has been replaced by the Local Plan Review SP9 on page 141 of your papers or 103 of the local plan. What that policy, and it's very, very controversial, it's nearly a copy of SP17, a copy and paste. I've looked at it, it does need reinforcing. I can't reinforce it a lot, but it's about development in the countryside. And under number 1 there, it talks about will not result in harm to the character and appearance of the area. I would like just simply, before, so we're able to debate it correctly, the word rural put before character, so we end up with not result in harm to the rural character of the countryside. Number 2 has got the same thing, and the next to last sentence, on the appearance and the rural character of the landscape. So the word rural included in those 2 sentences. I think during debate, and I'm hoping Councillor Spooner will second this, it will focus the debate and allow us to do more with that policy.
Councillor Spooner, I was going to get there first, but I will allow you.
I'm happy to second Councillor Mumford's proposition.
Thank you very much. Rob Jarman, would you like to speak on this?
I think the problem with, if we inserted the word rural, it would still include brownfield sites in the rural area. So the tests that, the 2 tests that any inspector will apply is the local authority, if it refuses a planning application, is it able to demonstrate that there's harm to the character and appearance of the area? So in straightforward terms, what does that actually mean? So a lot of development is on farmers' fields. What is a characteristic of a farmer's field? It's openness. So if you put just one house on a farmer's field, it's going to lose some of its open character. So if you are going to change this policy, I'd get openness in there, which was in the original structure plan, which I'm sure Councillor Spooner remembers. Because, you know, what is the key characteristic of the countryside? It's undeveloped.
Thank you. I think we actually seem to be going even further than Councillor Mumford imagined. But Mark Edgerton, would you want to?
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Mr. Jarman. What we've got here is the ability to actually slightly strengthen the policy. I think that the suggestion from Councillor Mumford, having a look at it from a sort of technical side of things, I think is actually fairly appropriate. I mean, the purpose of this policy is, of course, to allow appropriate development in the countryside, but we have to word things fairly positively. However, by very definition, I think, as Councillor Mumford has rightly pointed out, the countryside is rural. It's rural in its character. And I think, you know, having looked at, as Mr. Jarman's pointing out, you know, in planning committee point of view, you know, the councillors have been looking at proposals, and I think they've struggled slightly, given that it just refers to sort of general character. It's undefined character. But I do accept what Councillor Mumford says here, and I think it is absolutely right. Criteria 1 and criteria 2, if we change that to rural character on both occasions, I think what that would do, it would clearly define what we're trying to achieve there. It's the rural landscape, it's the rural character that's most important to this policy. It's its purpose. So I don't think it does any harm whatsoever. I think it's in accordance with the evidence that we do have. And so from an officer point of view, I don't think we'd have any objections at all to that inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Now, what might be easiest if it is accepted by Councillor Spooner and Webb? Are you happy to take that as part of your original motion? I suspect, Councillor Spooner, you will, yes, because then it will save us having to vote on it. We can vote on it as the substantive. Are you happy with that approach, Councillor Mumford?
I'm happy.
Thank you very much. When we come back to the to voting, I will emphasise exactly what we have here. Thank you very much. Next to speak, I have Councillor Russell, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened to what all of my councillor colleagues have said. I've listened to the officers, I've listened to everyone that spoke, and I've read all of the emails. And it just comes back to the numbers. Nobody wants to place these numbers in our borough. Have the plan, place the numbers. Kill the plan, have the numbers. What can we do, and where can we change this? It's got to be through our MPs, and we've got all of this documentation here, and one bit that I think is really missing is if we could get a letter signed by everybody from the council and send it to our MPs and just say, can you use your influence against these numbers? Thank you.
Yeah, it has indeed. Thank you very much, Councillor Russell. Next to speak, I have Councillor Clark and then Councillor Garton, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to bring attention to another element of the main local plan that we have from 2017 that isn't, I think it isn't really represented that well in this update. And in actual fact, the more I look at the map on page 106, the more it concerns me, because we have landscape of local value, and that's 68 in the document, 106 in the papers, 68 in the document. Now we have, as part of our actual local plan which is adopted, landscapes of local value, and most members that have been
Councillor Clark, I'm really sorry to interrupt. Which page number were you referring to?
106 in the central point. 106 in the local plan.
That is the map of the Leeds Langley
yes, it is.
Road. Yes. Sorry, I'm very, very sorry.
So
that's
if you're with the map, that's great.
I'm sorry. I
apologise
for interrupting. Continue.
So anyone that was here in 2017 fought and fought and fought to get landscapes of local development, landscapes of local value, so that the most precious parts of our borough will be considered as valued and not necessarily put straight forward for development. Now, in the Len Valley landscape of local value, a very substantial part of that landscape of local value is if you were to look at this as a hammer, it would be the head of that hammer. Actually, it comes down slightly further to the south. So actually, in that area of land that we're reserving for 4,000 houses for a road, on my real concern, now that I think about this and look in the context of this document with the adopted local plan, we're essentially saying, forget landscapes of local value, because all of that fight that we put in to say these are the precious landscapes, these are the things that we really treasure in the borough, actually we can put this forward with 2 paragraphs in the update to the local plan, and if it goes forward, there could be 4,000 houses there. If this is how we do it in the local plan update, we may as well forget landscapes of local value, because look how easy it was to get rid of them. And that you look at the River Len going through the centre of there, and the one thing that I can say, because I was involved in discussion about which side of that road this route should be, the one huge disadvantage of the western side was the biodiversity and the quality of that landscape. The big driver against the eastern side was the Leeds Castle estate. So this is a very, very controversial part of the borough, and it's the reason why after all these years we don't have a route for the Leeds Langley bypass. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a Leeds Langley bypass, but what we're doing here, we're specifically saying in this document that we put to the inspector, there's a bunch of different options around here, but what we're going to do, we're going to make the decision here, even though KCC have said that they have no interest in this, but as a borough, not the Highways Authority, we're going to make a decision that we're going to push it to the west of that road, which is a controversial decision, and we're going to take in a huge swathe of our landscape of local value. And what we're going to do with that, we don't need the numbers for our local plan review, we're going to reserve the possibility of 4,000 houses. I feel that this document should have our landscapes of local value overlaid throughout the document so that when this goes to Regulation 19, the public can actually look at it and say, oh, hold on a minute, I didn't realise this. There's no way that they would do that as this stands with page 105 and 106. They would just think, oh, wow, I'm going to get a bit of relief. They're going to be able to cut across from the Sutton Road to the A20 and onto the motorway. And I think that, you know, we really have done a disservice to the valued landscapes of this borough by creating this document in this format. Even though we've all talked about sites over the last couple of years, going out with this like this, I think there's something missing, and it really is to do with the priority we put on landscapes. In terms of, I just want to come back to a small point about the Sutton Road corridor, because this was mentioned by Councillor Mackay earlier, and it's to do with infrastructure generally. There's this sort of assumption that with these housing or these housing allocations, we will have very significant infrastructure. You look at Leedsing and you think, where's that infrastructure actually going to go as you meander through Boxley? But no, we go ahead, we do this plan for housing, and the infrastructure will follow because the developer will have to pay for it. We'll take the Sutton Road corridor. Most people in Maidstone will probably say that the Langley Park developments are one of the biggest developments in the last decade or beyond, well, beyond that, since the millennia. Now, when that came forward, what did we do for infrastructure? Well, KCC are the statutory body, so they went to the developer and they said, your development, that huge development, which we all know about, is going to cause harm in the borough. So we want you to put a certain amount of money towards that harm. And that happened, that went through the planning process. KCC is sitting on that money right now. But time and time and time again, there has been opposition to developing the Wallace Avenue, Willington Street junction, which affects the whole network right the way through to the Wheatsheaf and into the town. And that's still stuck in treacle. It's not progressed after all these years. So if we think that, oh, you know, this development is here, this development is there, we'll get all this infrastructure, it doesn't quite work like that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. Phil Coyne, do you wish to come in?
Yeah, if I can pick up Councillor Clark's comments on the Leeds Langley safeguarded area first. When I said earlier about moving development to the west, I didn't necessarily mean to the west of the safeguarded area. What I meant to say, my apologies if I worded it in a way that misled, was that of the original routes that KCC had looked at, the consultants we recruit or commissioned to do this, they said that you would need to develop the more westerly options in order to move away from Leeds Castle, from the ancient woodland and all of that, and particularly if one wanted to support build developments. In terms of the LLVs, that they don't necessarily have to prohibit development, but the very reason that we've kept this safeguarded area is so that if members indeed agree that we want to keep this safeguarded area in order to keep the option of the Leeds Langley route as a point in the future, is that we've then got another piece of work to do, which is to look at, if we have to have an amount of development in order to support the route, how do we configure that in such a way that it pays maximum respect and has the minimum impact on the landscapes of local value that are in there. On the infrastructure, on Councillor Clark's points on infrastructure, I think that is one of the benefits of the development at the scale of the garden community proposals, is because of the land value capture that's available to planning authorities as part of that. It is much easier to actually lock in the infrastructure than one can when dealing with sort of dispersed development.
Thank you very much. Next, I have Councillor Garton, please.
I'm particularly happy to have this Leeds-Langley corridor area marked out in the local plan. We've been talking for, 30 years now about a relief route going somewhere to somewhere. And if we continue doing what we've been doing for the last 30 years, this whole corridor will somewhere be built up and there won't be any room left for a relief road. What we're saying tonight is simply preserve this area. We may want to build a road there one day. Don't build anything in between in the meantime. And that is the whole purpose of this area being marked out. Now, if Councillor Clark suggests that 4,000 homes need to be built there, when I understand Mr. Coyle rightly, this was the worst case scenario to actually pay for the relief road without any other funding. So this is not what we're planning tonight, to build 4,000 homes there, or we're not even suggesting that. We're simply saying this is the worst case scenario. Keep this land for us. We're trying to work on it with KCC to see what we can do there. And I think that's why I am particularly happy to have this area marked out and reserved. On the other points tonight, we've been sitting between a rock and a hard place, and we've had plenty of members here in the audience, public speakers, addressing us about garden villages. We haven't really discussed garden villages yet tonight. The sad consequence of previous local plans was that while dispersing thousands of homes across the borough, we destroyed the soul of many small villages, grew separate villages into one, and most of all, we drained the infrastructure available. And therefore, I have been approached by campaign groups who oppose both garden villages. And but I feel that if we do have to build at the scale which the government suggests we need to build, then to meet our housing need, we need to concentrate the development in a few places as possible, I may hasten to add. And we need to build fresh infrastructure. We need to build a settlement from the outset. And dispersal is not a solution. We've tried that for too long and we have not been successful at it. I'm rather unhappy that we still have an element of dispersal in this local plan. So we haven't really chucked one thing out and adopted the other. We have now a mixture of two. But dispersal hasn't worked and we have to look at something different. Which then brings me to the point of, is it deliverable, what we are suggesting here? And we heard tonight that police investigations have been started for, well, shall we call it bullying or forgery or whatever it was, that they are land disputes. So my question back to the officers, can you hand on heart assure us that these two garden villages are deliverable? Because if we are voting for this tonight and take it to the next step forward, we need to be assured absolutely 100% that these sites are deliverable.
Thank you very much, Councillor Garton. Philip Coyne.
Chair, I'll start by saying, it's okay, from a planning authority perspective, we have no prior knowledge. I won't comment on it, but we have no prior knowledge of any policing or fraud investigation. What I will say is that the information that we have been provided with is sufficient at this point for us to be confident, and our viability consultants were confident that the promoters will be able to assemble the sites to deliver the developments.
Thank you very much for that reassurance, Phil. Next to speak, thank you very much. Next to speak, I have Councillor Webb and then Councillor Grigg.
Yes, this suggestion may well go down like a lead balloon, but members of the public have had their chance to offer their opinion. Through the chair, can the members of the public actually be quiet during this debate? Because this is what councillors are here to debate, please. The second point I'd like to make is, I'd like to pick up on Councillor Russell's suggestion that through the chair, you talk to the leader of the council about sending a letter to our local MP who makes every effort to engage with Oliver Dowden and also Michael Gove over the impossible targets that Maidstone Borough Council have got in terms of housing, and just make that point hard so that, you know, we may not be able to affect this current suggested consultation, but in future that might have an impact.
Thank you very much, Councillor Webb. Might I make a suggestion with regards to the letter that you just mentioned? It might be best if this is suggested to full council, so there is the weight of the full council behind it, rather than the request from the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee, if that's all right. And I do want to echo those points. I fully appreciate that there are comments being made which some people will disagree with, and I respect the strength of feeling. However, it would be helpful if we could continue without distraction. But I think that's enough said on the matter. Next to speak, I have Councillor Grigg, please.
Thank you. If it is any help, Chairman, I can confirm that last year there were several meetings with the MPs through Strategic Infrastructure Group, and that request was put to them several times, and I do believe that they were feeding back to that committee. So it may be something Chair wants to take forward. The reason why I actually put my card up is this is a very important decision tonight, and as such I'd like to ask for a named vote when we go for the decision.
Thank you very much. There are three people requesting a named vote, which has passed the threshold. Therefore, there will be a named vote. May I just confirm which particular recommendations that was on, Councillor Grigg?
That is the whole. I mean, we're doing the whole thing, aren't we, of all the recommendations together?
That's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
May I just confirm? Recommendation number 6 is actually for noting. I think that, if provided you're happy with recommendations 1 to 5, assuming everyone else is happy, I think it would be pretty difficult to note it, but I'm happy with that. Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak at this point? Councillor Garden.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, one important thing which I seem to be missing at this local plan is the gypsy and travellers allocation. I know that there's a development plan document being planned, and the work is in progress. I would have loved to see this in this local plan. Again, as I said earlier on, we are pushed for time. We missed the chance to accelerate this plan a while ago. Maybe we would have had the chance. Hopefully, in the next local plan review, we can give greater thought and credence to the gypsy and traveller community.
Thank you. Mark Edgerton, would you like to come back on that?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Garson. It's a very important point which is being raised here around the Gypsy and Traveller community, which is significant within this borough, and all members are aware of that. We have commissioned a Gypsy and Traveller and Travelling Show People Accommodation Needs Assessment. That work is ongoing. And yes, we've already received some feedback that the need resulting from that is likely to be significant. We've also been affected by the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic in that regard, in respect of undertaking site surveys, undertaking the questionnaires and so forth, and getting the primary data, which is so important for us in that regard. We, as a result of those factors, have decided that it's better to deal with a development plan document in its own right for this important community. And as a result of that, we, within this local plan review, have noted those intentions. Mr. Coyne has mentioned that we will be taking a report to November Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee regarding a local development scheme. And that timetable will include and it's intended to include the Gypsy and Traveller Development Plan document as well. So that should provide members with the certainty that's required, and all sectors of the community, the certainty required in respect of those, that community and the development plan document itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else wish to speak at this point? Fine. In that case, we will move on to the votes. We will have a series of named votes. What I will do at that point is I'll hand over to Olivia to confirm that. It's just one last thing that I want to confirm. I will ask Olivia to confirm it, and that is the wording. Obviously, Councillor Webb, you have suggested that we ask full council. After I say you have suggested, we sort of got there together. I just want to confirm we can make that as one of the recommendations tonight, that full council be requested on Wednesday. To sort of solve the question of someone proposing on Wednesday evening. Could I just ask Olivia to confirm the correct wording with that, please? Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. So the wording that I got down was that a letter be written to the local members of Parliament to request that they make every effort to engage with, I missed the first name, and Michael Gove, to ensure the full weight of council.
We're just confirming the amended wording for the recommendations. If you could bear with me for no more than one moment. Obviously, it's very important that we get this right this evening. Right, members, so that we are sure we're voting on, we will take the recommendations in turn. However, the amendment that was put together, which I understand was, well, we're voting on what is proposed by Councillor Spooner and seconded by Councillor Webb, which was obviously both councillors accepted the change of wording which was proposed by Councillor Mumford. That will affect recommendations 1 and 2. So for the avoidance of doubt, the changes that will be made to the wording of the draft policies will be as follow. So it will be subject to the insertion of the word rural in points 1 and 2 of policy LPRSP 9.
Oh, I came to that.
Sorry, who? Sorry. I'm not quite sure what happened there. So that's subject to the insertion of the word rural in points 1 and 2 of policy LPRSP 9 with an appendix 1, local plan review regulation 19, draft for submission document to read, development proposals in the countryside will not be permitted unless they accord with other policies in this plan and will not result in harm to the rural character and appearance of the rural area. And point 2 will read, agricultural proposals will be supported which facilitate the efficient use of the borough's significant agricultural land and soil resource, provided any adverse impacts on a rural appearance and rural character of the landscape can appropriately be mitigated. Therefore, recommendation number 1 is that full council be recommended to approve the Maidstone Borough Local Plan Review Draft for Submission Document, Appendix 1, and Associated Policies Map, Appendix 2, for public consultation under Regulation 19 of the Town and Country Planning, Local Planning England Regulation 2012, as amended, between the 29th of October 2021 and the 12th of December 2021, subject to the change of words that I just highlighted. Olivia, would you ask the committee in turn, please? Could I confirm that that is correct, Councillors Spooner and Webb?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. So, Councillor Clark.
Against.
Chairman.
For.
Councillor Garton.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Grigg.
Against.
Councillor Mackay.
I'll say again, against.
Councillor Mumford.
For. Sorry, you probably didn't get that. For.
Councillor Russell.
For.
Councillor Spooner.
For.
And Councillor Webb.
For.
Chairman, that is 6 votes for and 3 against, and that is carried.
The motion is carried. We move on now to recommendation number 2, which again is subject to the change in wording which I have just read out. And full council be recommended to approve the Maidstone Borough Local Plan Review Draft for Submission Document, Appendix 1, and Associated Policies Map, Appendix 2 for submission under Regulation 22 of the Town and Country Planning, Local Planning England Regulation 2012, as amended to the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, / Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities for examination under Section 20 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. Can I once again confirm, for the avoidance of doubt, that that is the correct Councillor Spooner and Councillor Webb?
Yes.
Indeed. Once again, Olivia, would you please go around the committee?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Clark.
Against.
Chairman.
For.
Councillor Garton.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Grigg.
Against.
Councillor Mackay.
Against.
Councillor Mumford.
For.
Councillor Russell.
For.
Councillor Spooner.
For.
And Councillor Webb.
For.
Again, Chairman, that is 6 votes for and 3 against, and that is carried.
Thank you very much, Olivia. The motion is carried. Next is recommendation number 3, which is as per the urgent update. Again, I will read this. My understanding is that there is no amendment to it other than what was in the urgent update. It's recommendation 3 is that full council be recommended to grant delegated powers to the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee to submit a schedule of proposed main modifications which the committee believed to be acceptable arising from the consultation responses in respect of the local plan review draft for submission document and associated policies map arising from representations made under Regulation 20 of the Town and Country Local Planning England Regulations 2012 as amended to the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, or the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Can I just confirm that that is indeed correct as per your understanding, Councillor Spooner, as you proposed it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Once again, I ask Olivia to go around the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Against.
Chairman.
For.
Councillor Garton.
For.
Against.
Councillor Mackay.
Against.
Councillor Mumford.
For.
Councillor Russell.
For.
Councillor Spooner.
For.
And Councillor Webb.
Yes, I agree as the seconder and also agree now.
Thank you, Chairman. That is 6 for, 3 against, and that is carried.
Thank you very much, Olivia. The motion is again carried. Move on to recommendation number 4, which is as per the committee papers. For the avoidance of doubt, the recommendation states that the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee recommends that full council provides delegated authority to the Head of Planning and Development to make factual alterations and minor amendments such as graphics, layout, spelling and grammatical changes to the local plan review draft for submission document and associated policy maps. Once again, if I can just confirm that that is as anticipated for the proposer and seconder.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Olivia, once again, would you go around the committee?
Councillor Clark.
Against.
Chairman.
For.
Councillor Garton.
For.
Councillor Mrs Grigg.
Against.
Councillor Mackay.
Against.
Councillor Mumford.
For.
Councillor Russell.
For.
Councillor Spooner.
For.
And Councillor Webb.
For.
6 for, 3 against. That is carried, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Recommendation number 4 is carried. Move on to recommendation number 5, which again is as per your document pack, and it reads that the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee recommends that full council approves the Suitability Appraisal of the Maidstone Local Plan Review Regulation 19 pre-submission document, Appendix 3 for public consultation between the 29th of October 2021 and 12th of December 2021. Again, if I could confirm for the avoidance of doubt with Councillor Spooner and Webb that that is as anticipated.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Confirming.
Thank you. Olivia, if you could run through the committee, please.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Against.
Chairman.
For.
Councillor Garton.
For.
Councillor Mrs Grigg.
Against.
Councillor Mackay.
Against.
Councillor Mumford.
For.
Councillor Russell.
For.
Councillor Spooner.
4.
And Councillor Webb.
4.
6 for, 3 against. That is carried.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Again, that is carried. Move on now to recommendation number 6. This is that the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee notes the list of documents within the evidence base provided as background documents to this report and the working draft statements of common ground exempt Appendix 4 that will support the local plan review. Can I take that from Councillors Spooner and Webb that they are content?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Committee,
Confirm.
is that noted, committee? Thank you very much, that's noted. And there is one additional recommendation, number 7, and that is that the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee recommends that to full council, that a letter be written to the local members of Parliament to request that they make every effort to engage in relation to the council's house building targets with Oliver Dowden and Michael Gove. Are you content with that, Simon? Councillor?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Councillor Grigg, are you happy if I take that as a block vote, or would you like a named vote on that recommendation? Members, is that agreed? I believe that's agreed unanimously. Anyone against? Or abstaining? Thank you very much. Members, thank you very much this evening. Members of the public, again, thank you very much. I now declare that this meeting is closed. Thank you.